This nation was founded
by men of many nations and backgrounds.
It was founded on the principle.
That all men are created equal.
That all men are created equal. And that the rights of every man are diminished.
When the rights of every man are
threatened.
I would like to acknowledge the influential individuals who have made countless sacrifices for the greater good of humanity. If anyone aims to change the world, they must begin with the improvement of self, followed by the improvement of family, community, nation, and if it's meant to be, the world. History was never made by the weak, feeble, or fearful. It is transformed by the resilience, strength, and the determination of others. A huge shout out to those fearless individuals who are courageous enough to make history. C.J. Ward. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we see. In the words of Mr. Barack Obama.
Greetings. Let me begin by providing a plain example of the title's premise, A Conscientious Conversation. Let us say, in World War II, Germany and the alliance, led by Hitler and the Nazi nation, succeeded and took over the country and brought over prisoners of war during the Siege of Power. Let us also say, for the sake of argument, from September 2nd, 1945 and beyond, every U.S. citizen had to adhere to the doctrines, manifestos, and every anti-ism Adolf could conceive. And to make matters more interesting, let us say, for the United States flag, being the United States of America, it was a thin striped banner with one single broken cross, rather than the stars and stripes. A justice system of genocidal holocaust, unwarranted brutality from the Wehrmacht for those who are tagged as golden stars, and constant propaganda from the national spokesman, from which biased communication was invented. Lastly, again, for the sake of conversation, entire generations of lost birthrights through the decimation of family crest and economic oppression. Can you imagine such a condition in this great and prosperous country of incorporated policies? Thank God for the Constitution. Matter of fact, how do you believe our wonderful Constitution will protect the affected if history yielded alternate results?
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Powerful, right? These expressions are very reassuring words for the common, law-abiding citizen of this nation of United States. However, how would the previous quote and core of the Constitution assist or aid any prisoners of war under Hitler, the Nazi regime, and the Axis? Let us look at an alternate example of the Constitution if read under Nazi rule.
We the people of the Nazi regime, in order to form a more perfect nation, establish dominance, ensure domestic rule, provide defense for the regiment, and also only our nation, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the Alien Nation.
How does this doctrine sound with a few name changes and forced policies? Does this change your mind about the Constitution of the United States of America, or alter your feelings about how the world would be if the war went another direction? How about other nations of the world? Do you believe this change in verbiage would impact Japan and the Italian Social Republic? Or better yet, try to envision Japan as the current Republic of China and the Italian Social Republic victorious over the Soviet Union. Regardless of the answer, we both can agree this world would definitely be altered in some form or fashion. With this substitute example of World War II's fate, we can firmly acknowledge war changes things economically, culturally, and legislative, etc. Therefore, since we have discussed the topic of worldwide conflict briefly, let us proceed by breaking down the effects of war domestically. Due to the mounting number of opposing views and values carried out on the soil of the current United States of America, there is an overabundance of wars and conflicts to choose from. The Cherokee and American War and numerous conflicts involving native tribes and land skirmishes, the Mexican and American War and various rebellions, to the monumental American Civil War and financial factors embodied. However, for the sake of a conscientious conversation, the American Civil War will suffice. Before we dive into the surrounding factors and related influences leading to the American Civil War, let us establish what the war encompassed.
Shortly after the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln, the northern and southern states of the Union developed a difference of opinion as it related to the Constitution of the United States. The northern states favored the Constitution and wanted labor regulated, while the South opposed the articles and ideals of the separation of powers. Or, as a simple expression, the South favored slavery and the enormous profits associated, while the North preferred the regulation of profits and was pro-government.
Why is this breakdown necessary? Answer. After the first slave ship docked the shores of a Virginia colony in 1619, the Cherokee, Seminole, Comanche, and other native tribes fought over their homelands. The Mexican nation battled over the territory north of the modern Mexican border. Most of the opposing forces derived from European descent. Now, why is this important?
Jamestown, Virginia established the first permanent English colony on American mainland, 1607. A Dutch ship brings the first African slaves to British North America, 1619. French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Treaty of Paris, 1763. Boston Massacre, 1770. Boston Tea Party, 1773. First Continental Congress, 1774. And American Revolution, 1775 through 1783. In 1724, in particular, the Louisiana Code Noir, or Slave Code, was established to control the social relations between the slaves and colonists. This information was collected for colonists of the French Caribbean in 1685 and remained as a standard practice until the United States claimed Louisiana in 1803. The use of 54 black codes regulated slaves and free slaves and established the association between slaves and slave owners. And the black codes, along with the social impact it shaped, tilled and prepared the grounds in preparation for the years of Jim Crow. Jim Crow, or Jim Crow laws, legalized racial segregation and encouraged the vile and grotesque attacks against humanity.
Based on the enormous profits attained by southern states of the Union, the northern states wanted government regulations established to control the profits and the slave monopoly held by the Confederate States, checks and balances, etc. From these intentions, the Constitution of the United States was created.
In addition to the Constitution of the United States of America, the Constitution of African Civilization Society and the Constitution of the Female Anti-Slavery Society of Salem were also created and established. Then, on September 25, 1789, the first Congress offered 12 amendments to include in the Constitution. From the 12 proposed amendments, 10 of the amendments were ratified by the state legislation on December 15, 1791, better known as the Bill of Rights. With consideration to the manner of the day, the right to bear arms, freedom of speech, and unlawful search and seizure of property were instituted for the interests of the common man and the woman of the land, not the slave or anyone other than European descent. Keep this factor in mind for the latter chapters of this publication. As a result of the recent changes, the government of 13 United States desired to get rid of themselves from Great Britain's rule. In addition, the government needed to appease the societal groans of learning how to exist with each other. For these matters, the colonists received the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776.
All matters considered, every action has a reaction. The Declaration of Independence throughout the Civil War altered the social fabric of the nation. And let us not forget about the deleted passages of the Declaration of Independence. After watering the United States soil with the blood of countless martyrs and unbelievable atrocities, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by the current President, Abraham Lincoln, of the United States. And the order came into effect January 1st, 1863. After briefly covering a few U.S. origins, I am reminded of the following saying: there is nothing new under the sun, which is and holds a particular bearing to the timeline of world history. For example, during the time periods covered from 1619 to 1863, there were countless individuals and groups of individuals who chose to fight against their circumstances and rebelled in contradiction to repression. Based on these principles of rebellion, and contrary to the times from BC or BCE, there have been hundreds and hundreds of rebellions, revolts, uprisings, and revolutions.
From the Athenian Revolution establishing democracy in Athens from 508 to 507 BCE to the 2006 democratic movement in Nepal. No one can argue against the voices and concerns of the people or masses.
This concept still holds true and held in regard from the beginning of time. For example,
the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. Captivity normally comes with an expiration date. However, the expiration date is typically dependent on the people held captive.
For a moment, consider this point of reference. Think about the current systems and institutional dictatorships of the time. Have these factions silenced the voices of the people forever? Do the opposed yearn for a democratic reemergence? However, before you answer, also consider this. Why would an institution or system assist you at becoming independent or free? Apart from minorities facing the life of oppression, the segregated world of a slave indentured servant, or free man, would also include another form of oppression, genocide, by dispersing the infamous Willie Lynch letter or the terminology of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach.
Along with the mental traumas associated to supremacist teachings, have survived the test of time and proven effective by the current state of any and every melanated male who has ever set foot on American soil or territories of American influence. Although the race classifications of Blumenbach or the purported Lynch letter played a part, it is hard to ignore the teachings of the timeless story of Cain and Abel. Unfortunately, the U.S. society has adopted and embraced the traditions of selfishness rather than selflessness, and proof of this allegation can be seen across the board. With these forms of environmental, mental, behavioral, and physical conditions, where is the protection? Self-preservation. Now, a person must ask themselves, what's wrong with self-preservation? If so, my best response would be nothing, per se. But gluttony of any form can be hazardous to your health. Any person, regardless of race, color, creed, or gender, if left alone for any extended period of time, will present a certain set of challenges and obstacles. Feel free to inquire about the lasting effects of solitude from the 2.2 million persons currently incarcerated in prison or jail. And get this, incarceration rates have increased by more than 500% in the last 40 years. Lastly, and more alarmingly, are the unproportionate rates and numbers projected for U.S. residents born in 2001. Check out these stats from the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for U.S. residents born in 2001. For all men, there was a 1 in 9% chance of them facing imprisonment in their lifetime. For white men, it was 1 in 17. For black men, it was 1 in 3. For Latino men, 1 in 6. Now let's go to the women. For all women, it was a 1 in 56% chance for the likelihood of imprisonment for all women. For white women, it was 1 to 111. For black women, it was 1 in 18. For Latino women, it was 1 in 45. In consideration to the findings solely, how can individuals who find themselves on the short end of these statistics survive, especially when a majority never received adequate interventions or rehabilitation? Serving as a proud supporter and advocate for mental health awareness and post-traumatic stress disorder interventions and support for military veterans, this is an important question. Reason being, if we, as a nation or society, never provide adequate services or aid for those who have fought or were injured to serve their country, how in the world of little baby Jesus can we expect proper provision for any other residents dealing with trauma?
Without appropriate care, what is the sociological response to bias treatment? Answer: self-destruction. It is nature. If a subject fails to receive external support and comfort, the subject will eventually internalize the occurrence and break down internally. A few minority perspectives may suggest you're only speaking from a vantage point of the oppressed and downtrodden. My career and networking opportunities have afforded a great lifestyle for my family and I. And for many U.S. residents and non-residents, this is an honest and accurate depiction of their outlook. However, I hate to burst any bubbles. Reason being, if anyone is classified as a minority, with the exception of an extremely low percentile, roughly 1 to 2%, in this country and have attained a certain level of wealth, you and your family are always one generation or a hardship away from joining the other 98% of the country. Based on this sense of realism, what is your initial thought after reading the following?
Belligerents hold prisoners of war in custody for a range of legitimate and illegitimate reasons, such as isolating them from enemy combatants still in the field, releasing and repatriating them in an orderly manner after hostilities, demonstrating military victory, punishing them, prosecuting them for war crimes, exploiting them for their labor, recruiting or even conscripting them as their own combatants, collecting military and political intelligence from them, or indoctrinating them in new political or religious beliefs.
Any impressions? Are you still debating over your overall assessment or feelings? If so, read the following statement and hopefully it will assist you with your interpretation.
Belligerents, a nation or person engaging in war or conflict, hold prisoners of war, a person, whether combatant or non-combatant, in custody for a range of legitimate and illegitimate reasons, lawfully or unlawfully, such as isolating them from enemy combatants in the field, releasing and reparating them in an orderly manner after hostiles, demonstrating military victory, acknowledged for a physical accomplishment, punishing them, oppression, prosecuting them for war crimes, justice system, exploiting them for their labor, indentured servitude, recruiting, and even conscribing them to their own combatants, slavery, collecting military and political intelligence from them, networking, or indoctrinating them into new political or religious beliefs, politics, and religion.
Now, with the definitions added, had your feelings changed, altered, or remain the same? The most dangerous reality is for a soldier or armed forces to be unaware of the war at hand, whether they have enlisted or not. With that established, the Constitution was never intended for the Black community, as stated prior, in regards to prisoners of war. The Constitution reads,
"We, the people." In 1787, as a clause in the Constitution suggested, enslaved persons were considered 3/5 of a citizen. Therefore, the Constitution protects only 3/5 of the constitutional rights suggested in the document. This may sound ridiculous to some, but logical for many others. This reality of varying opinions has been around for years and will continue to be present. Similar to the conflicting ideologies of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Both of these influential individuals desired equity and prosperity, but had dissimilar approaches to achieving this feat within the confines of an oppressive society. When considering this truth, individuals of color or minorities of systematic power only have two choices: the philosophy of Pan-Africanism and separate but equal, like that of Du Bois, or choose to accept current social constructs through the integration and go along with the disenfranchisement until equal measures are offered with Washington. Either way, the topic of dealing with oppression deserves a conscientious conversation. In addition, why would anyone look to their oppressors or beneficiaries of oppression for help or assistance? I believe this type of ideology has been indoctrinated into the subconscious of many through the Great White Hope phenomenon, which I will discuss further in Chapter 6 of this manuscript. So, until then, I will conclude this chapter by offering this inquisition. Seriously, Could you imagine if professional athletes, regardless of ethnicity or background, used their skills and talents on a battlefield rather than the fields of turf and grass, wooden courts, rubber surfaces, square canvases, or boundaries of dirt?
Regardless of your view or stance, this country is solely dependent on integration and reluctant settlements. Considering the premise of this manuscript, the prisoners of war finally received an opportunity to live and operate, what would occur? To answer this question, history could hand us a plethora of examples and real-life outcomes. For example, German immigration throughout the history of the American nation represents one of the strongest cultural influences on the larger social makeup of the American nation.
German immigration began long before actual American sovereignty and actually maintains a representation of the original English settlement in Jamestown. The majority of Italian immigrants settled in most major cities, and their labor generally leaned towards unskilled factory work in their early years of immigration. Though some farm settlements of Italian immigration have gained a level of historic lore. Immigration laws of the early 20th century attempted to limit the number of Italian immigrants entering the country. Often referred to as new immigration, an influx in immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe wrongfully encouraged federal immigration laws aimed to decrease the allowed number of immigrants from these regions. The history of Irish immigration began in large part during the middle of the 19th century. Most historians recognize this trend as a direct result of crop failures, commonly referred to as potato famine. Since the Irish economy placed a heavy necessity on potato crop, the failures resulted in widespread poverty, famine, and death. Large percentages of the entire Irish populace immigrated to the United States, making long-standing American citizens wary of that. Overarching stereotypes placed on Irish immigrants assume that they may deflate the idea of an American dream and comprise the first true American working class. Irish immigrants settled in some of the worst areas of the modern-day cities. For example, the Five Points district of New York City became home of an immense number of these immigrants. Asian American immigrants experienced a great deal of prejudice throughout American immigration history and were often unduly denied opportunity to join the American system and basic social structure. Chinese immigration made up the first wave of the Asian immigrants entering the continental United States, initially for gold prospects on the West Coast. Chinese immigrants were eventually scorned and then even banned entirely. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first legislation predicated on Asian racism and a long line of horrific affronts to the Asian American culture. Japanese American immigrants expressed additional racism, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's signing an executive order allowing Japanese citizens to be interned to protect against suspected, wrongfully so, espionage or other subversive practices. Asian immigrants would not be given fair rights or equal protection in the history of immigration until after the mid-20th century. Latin American immigration is oftentimes reduced in scope to Mexican immigration due to the proximity of Mexico and America, as well as Mexico being a usual entry point for immigrants coming from South America. Historically, immigration from Mexico and other Latin countries to America was a common practice and respected as usual back and forth of individuals in search of best occupations. Often, these Mexican and other Latinos would enter America for seasonal work and then return home to their families. As time went on, these workers began to settle in American Southwest. They were formerly under Mexican control, simply opting to illegally immigrate.
After reading the brief overview of German, Italian, Irish, Latin, and Asian migration into America, I believe we all can agree hardships were experienced by each ethnic group, and based on common knowledge, I will refrain from including the Trail of Tears
and the inconceivable acts committed and remain today against the African immigrants who are abducted and oppressed. However, one truth I would like to point out: regardless of the ethnicity or country of origin, a certain level of difficulty came along with the experience. However, from the lenses of an historian, each ethnic group experienced a unique result. For example, German Americans worked together and established Germantown. Italian Americans united and created Little Italy. Irish Americans organized and indoctrinated St. Patrick's Day. Latin Americans fought and negotiated the Good Neighbor policy. Asian Americans strategized and developed Chinatown. Native Americans revolted and received in exchange reservations. And African Americans fought and were offered civil rights. However, the longevity of these outcomes have been greatly dependent on the effectiveness of unity and working as a collective body. Using African Americans as an example, what does history report? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a great victory and occurrence for the African American population and society as a whole. However, due to Jim Crow, the bombing of Black Wall Street, and the slew of other atrocious acts, the true fruits of labor were dispersed to others. This concept may be a little murky for some, but follow the explanation. Hopefully, it will bring about a higher resolution. Segregation, slavery, Jim Crow, 1619 and 1954 and beyond, and Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. Then we go to desegregation, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. Then we transition to integration, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Disassociation will be the next on the chart, War on Drugs or New Jim Crow, 1971. Then we trail back to segregation, gentrification, 1971 to the present. Of course, as anyone could imagine, there were quite a few lasting effects. In fact, without being facetious, someone could write a book about the lasting effects of such drastic trauma and transition. However, to name a few, a sharp decline in African American males serving as head of household, and a gradual shift in the African American community by way of transference of social dynamics. Between 1960 and 1985, female-headed families grew from 20.6 to 43.7% of all Black families, compared to growth from 8.4 to 12% for white families. Recent estimates suggest that more than all of Black families are headed by women. Ricketts, 1989. Resembling the occurrence of falling dominoes, one action leads to numerous reactions. The increase of African American women as head of the household is one of those reactions and outcomes, hence ultimately creating the independent woman phenomenon that spread throughout the United States and really caught fire in the 1990s. Crabs in a barrel mentality. Term: crab in a barrel mentality. Definition: the behavior of a certain demographic geared towards sabotaging other members of the same demographic. Concept: if a group of crabs are trapped in a barrel and one crab attempts to escape, the other crabs will make every attempt to pull the escaping crab back down.
Based on historical accounts, the psychological effects associated with severe trauma, ethnic genocide, self-harm, hopelessness, and etc. Certain traits and behaviors remained over time, specifically since slavery. Perfect example, the feeble comparisons of the house Negro versus the field Negro. Or, simply expressed, light skin versus dark skin. Each label perpetuates the concept. The darker your complexion, the more dangerous you are considered or generalized. However, based on real-life experiences and numerous accounts from other male minorities, this concept is almost solely concerned amongst minorities. While the international impressions is less defined. If you are identified as black, you are black, and that is that. And that is regardless of what complexion a person is considered.
These occurrences, unfortunately, are a global factor at the present time, which, naturally, has manifested into what I like to define as confusion of self. And this confusion of self brings along additional factors to ponder. As a body, a large number of African Americans cannot trace back family lineage. Why is this important? The truth shall set you free. And since many individuals remain confined by the unknown, myself included, we are not privy to the origin, so we are collectively confused and separated from the direction of our future as a body. In addition, with a societal history of data information suppression, most of this nation has limited knowledge of the Moors prior to slavery, or at all. Once again, the truth shall set you free. Not only as it pertains to the Moors, but the ethnic groups who are native to this land, imported or migrated to this country.
All factors considered, the crabs in the barrel notion was generated from this confusion of self. Lastly, by imagining this particular mentality, including the indoctrination of race by Johann Blumenbach or the Willie Lynch syndrome, trauma and dysfunction handed down from slavery, and the systematic brainwashing of Jim Crow. The most unbiased person could easily conclude it all boils down to envy. Envy for attention, promotion, admiration, appreciation, and overall acceptance. The idea of identifying with something has a huge bearing on how people feel about themselves. In addition, persons who do not have a point of reference to identity or was robbed of their past have a difficult path ahead with an origin that has been wiped clean.
Individuals in this category may not know what or how to feel. In actuality, these individuals are prone and susceptible to persuasion and forced to adapt foreign indoctrination from others, especially when the influencers are fully aware of their own lineage and cognizant of the possible misfortunes of the ignorant. When referencing an ignorant individual, it is not referring to a lack of intelligence, but not being privy to the truth of a particular matter. And a person who fits this description may potentially be led anywhere. Hence, most of the content related to African Americans customarily begins with slavery in the U.S., school curriculum, Black History Month, media programming, and the list continues. Normally, the legendary stories of Mansa Musa, the affluent history of the Moors, and true evolution of humankind, and the vast wealth of the motherland are not told or celebrated. Of course, what oppressor or bully would want the oppressed to learn about how a man of color was, and still is, known as the wealthiest person on earth? Matter of fact, Mansa Musa disrupted the currency systems of various lands he visited. With that type of information, it would be difficult to inflict a mindset of poverty on anyone who could say they spawned from such a legacy. Critics may say, not all black people came from Mr. Musa, so that may not be accurate. My reply would be, okay, What about the persons of Moorish descent? And if that reply doesn't suffice, how about the motherland, which would actually include the critic as his or her place of origin as well?
The lapse in self-worth for the average African American has developed into a negative self-image. So, what could be the powerful effects of a negative self-image?
Self-doubt, self-pity, low self-esteem, regret, etc. Essentially, an individual or group failing to live and operate to their fullest potential. And if a person finds it difficult or impossible to feel good about themselves or their perceived position in society, how on God's green earth would anyone expect individuals with lower self-esteem to pull themselves up by the bootstraps or work in unity with others? Since this concern is much larger than anyone or group, the sense of working collaboratively with others, same ethnicity or not, is crucial. Otherwise, the necessity of crossing over with hopes of catering to a broader audience will not be as typically practiced. Why? Every culture should be celebrated for the positive influence and impact they have on society and the world. Therefore, the notion to cross over should not be as significant or widespread, or, as normally suggested, due to the societal advancements of every culture. It should be celebrated on general principle, without jeopardizing any cultural integrity.
I believe we all should look into the mirror of our souls and analyze our knowledge of self, and if known, the lineage whence we came, beginning with the reference of a disconnected community. Did the sectional content shed a spotlight on the impact of migration into the U.S.? How about crabs in a barrel mentality? Did the unique perspective introduce an alternate means of viewing black on black crime and violence?
What about the certain cultural impact attached to self-worth? And lastly, what about the observational factors related to how African Americans became divided and the why of not being united based on the lack of self-esteem?
In conclusion, how do you feel about the issues concerning the Black and African American community? I believe the subject matter, along with others, deserves a conscientious conversation. As an African American classified as Black or two or more races, I've experienced and witnessed the numerous atrocities committed against males who fit my description in some ways or another. And this form of lesson has been and continues to be expressed through a variety of ways. To name a few: media, penal system, entertainment, and the list goes on.
In reference to the media, minorities in the U.S. are viewed as easy scapegoats, specifically African American males. For immediate proof, locate the closest TV, PC, or radio and turn it on. Regardless of the TV show, movie, or website, qualitative or quantitative sources, there is a 95% chance the viewer will see or conceive a negative or unflattering image of a Black male. For example, someone is robbed. It was 1 or 3, for whatever reason, the number 3 is the most used number. Black guys did it. Someone committed a crime. Oh, grab that guy. It looks like he fits the description. Or the timeless tale. A Black guy raped me. Matter of fact, if you're not sold on these claims, test the hypothesis and judge the situation for yourself. In reference to the penal system, a few of the pitiful stats against humanity have already been provided, specifically inmates of color. Again, based on primary and secondary experience, if you are classified as black, you will always be seen guilty until proven innocent. Perfect example. On the evening of June 15, 2018, I was illegally stopped on the southern region of Louisville, Kentucky by two members, Matthew Johnson and Matthew Roderer, of the Shepherdsville Police Department, and a Louisville Metro police officer, E. Walker, along with his K-9 unit. Later, I discovered the stop was outside of jurisdiction, the officers illegally searched my car, and I was unlawfully detained until no drugs were found or any other form of contraband. Although it was temporarily inconvenient, I received great pleasure in voicing the frustrations of a black male who has experienced police harassment since the age of 14. And since the age of 14, I have dozens of additional accounts. However, this situation stands out because of how it ended. After an uncomfortable apology, Johnson's girlfriend, sitting in the passenger side seat, heard and witnessed the change of red facial pigment as a result of being embarrassed. Then, Roderer and Walker made a comment that will never fade. They remarked, "Sorry for the inconvenience. We had to make sure that you weren't a bad guy." Now keep in mind, the only premise was the color of my skin and the region of the country. The Commonwealth can be brutal. In essence, all black males are, once again, guilty until proven innocent, especially if you are a black male operating a decent vehicle in certain demographics. And the observer is resentful for how a black male can afford such a purchase with all the systematic traps in place. I believe this type of confusion, supported by media projections and programming, has many individuals, with or without a badge, terrified and on the defense. Yet again, if still not convinced, observe the extremely long list of innocent unarmed citizens shot and killed by law enforcement, or cowardly individuals comfortable enough to take the law into their own hands. I think it is simple. Most people are scared of what they do not understand, and most people cannot seem to understand how we, specifically black males, have survived and thrived over the years. Regardless of the harsh treatment this world throws our way, we continue to be resilient.
Due to the history of societal misunderstandings and/or fear amongst ethnic groups at large, an even longer and darker history exists, especially in terms of the dynamic between authorities and integrated citizens of the land, and in many cases, abroad. There are countless examples of bloody and brutal acts against civilization, but I will only address selected cases. Let us begin with the tragic killing of Emmett Till, then transition into the institutional manslaughter of Khalif Browder.
In 1955, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old teenager from Chicago, Illinois, visiting his relatives in Money, Mississippi. He was kidnapped and brutally murdered by Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam for allegedly whistling at a white female. The following day, Bryant and Millam was arrested and later acquitted of all charges by an all-white, all-male jury. Although the case was reopened in 2004 and investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, over the 3-year period, nothing was really done about the horrific event, other than the deadbed confession of Leslie Millam, another person involved in the kidnapping and murder of the late Emmett Till.
Emmett Till, rest in peace, young brother. Sorry you had to experience such mutilation and hatred, and my sincerities are issued to all the known and unknown victims of lynching or hate crimes. Although the topic of lynching is an emotional task, the grotesque nature of lynching and hate crimes are very similar to the hate crimes and police brutality of the present day. Not convinced? If so, research the tragic circumstances surrounding the individuals on the next list. After reviewing the list of victims, how did it make you feel? Regardless of the circumstances or situation, wrong is wrong, even if you favor black or blue lives. Now let us discuss the psychological killing of Kalief Browder.
In 2010, Kalief Browder was a 16-year-old teenager from the Bronx, New York, who was falsely accused of stealing a backpack. While awaiting trial, Kalief spent 3 years in Rikers Island, which 2 of those years was spent in solitary confinement. However, after being released due to a lack of evidence and a faulty witness fleeing the country, Browder committed suicide 2 years later in his mother's residence. Currently, there is a campaign led by courageous activists seeking criminal justice reform in New York and hopefully nationwide. This instance is highlighted to further illustrate how, specifically within the US, being the defaulted can play out. Wrongful imprisonment, stop and frisk, illegal search and seizure, etc. An innocent life, robbed of a fair life, could possibly take life.
Kalief Browder, rest in peace, young brother. Sorry you had to experience such trauma and injustice. My sincerities are issued to the known and unknown victims of PTSD and wrongful imprisonment.
Based on the stories mentioned, factors involved, and details pertaining, a person could suggest it would take Jesus coming back before things would change. And regardless, facetious or not, reflect on the following scripture, and the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. With that thought in mind, consider this. I am not a forecaster of fate, but it is hard to ignore numbers and inequities. The American dollar is not backed, meaning it is not worth the mint it is printed on, remaining in a oppressive state. And based on the decisions and strategies of certain powers, foreign and domestic, a major international currency change would undoubtedly cause an immediate financial collapse. Think about it. The government is fueled by the American dollar. And if a financial collapse occurred, so does the American government. Now think about the alternative. A certified dictatorship without the illusion of democracy. Bye-bye free speech. Will you be able to defend yourself, your family, or your loved ones?
Regarding the image most black men and many other minorities have been handed by their country, it is no coincidence to observe decreased levels of self-worth.
This commonality can partially explain the 40-cent decrease of empathy among the U.S. Levels of empathy fell by 48% between 1979 and 2009. Conraith, O'Brien, and Singh, 2010. How did I form this opinion? Answer: the reasons are vast, but I will only sum it up with another past instance. The releasing of radioactive particles over selected sections of St. Louis, Missouri to test chemical warfare technology during the dates of 1953 and 1954, and 1963 and 1965. For more information concerning this inhuman occurrence, check out Behind the Fog by Dr. Lisa Martino Taylor. Now, why would I include this example? Answer: Tuskegee syphilis experiment. When this heartless experiment began in 1932, until it received a public outcry in 1972, when the Associated Press released the story. Those individuals and groups did not empathize with the 600 black men as a person or a human being. And from the Tuskegee experiment to the releasing of chemical compounds over the predominantly low-income and minority-based communities of St. Louis, we now discover about the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC. In particular, the CDC study of experimental measles, mumps, and rubella, MMR, vaccines. Once again, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. For more information about the CDC study, read about the article, Age of Autism, by Dan Olmsted. Concerning the information provided, I hope you take away the following thought concerning black men, African American males, minorities, and other males from lower socioeconomic groups. The less you care about us, the less the U.S. cares about you.
Overall, black men are divided and not united due to a loving history. Hurt people hurt people. And black men in America and worldwide have not only been hurt, but murdered, victimized, lynched, enslaved, traumatized, using experiments, sold, incarcerated, and many other despicable acts without receiving the recommended treatment.
After researching the topic and referencing various cognitive and behavioral approaches, the most simplistic and feasible recommendation to offer is the following will be recommended responses versus responses received. First recommended response: don't take it personally. Response received: incarceration, death, career reprimands, etc. The second recommended response: listen. Response received: never heard, judicial reprimands, etc. Third recommended response: have compassion. Response received: severe lack of support, isolation, guilty until proven innocent, etc. The fourth recommended response: be your own authority. Response received: the defaulted for anything negative, usual suspect, wrong side of entitlement, etc. The fifth and final recommended response for this section: walk away. Response received: bullied, systematic intimidation, culturally insensitive mandates, racism through legislation. In 1968, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, only 3 years after signing the Civil Rights Act, and coincidentally, the same year of Martin Luther King's assassination, founded the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, or BNDD. In 1969, urine analysis studies are conducted by Dr. Robert DuPont to link crimes to heroin addiction, ultimately convincing Washington, D.C.'s Mayor Walter Washington to permit him to provide methadone to heroin addicts. Also the same year, Operation Intercept is used to close the Mexican border to reduce marijuana smuggling from Mexico, which was later combated by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML. In 1970, the Richard Nixon administration provided funding to, yet again, Robert DuPont to expand his methadone program in D.C. and founded the Narcotics Treatment Administration. Also, that same year, Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention Control Act, allowing police to conduct no-knock searches. Also included in the act, a Controlled Substance Act, establishing regulation to drugs based on medicinal value and potential for addiction. In addition, in 1971, Operations Golden Flow went into effect, issuing an order to begin urine analysis of all returning servicemen, which statistically proved favorable and beneficial. In 1972, after American soldiers developed a heroin addiction in Vietnam, Robert Steele, a Republican in Connecticut, and Morgan Murphy, a Democrat in Illinois, released a report highlighting the growing heroin epidemic amongst U.S. servicemen. Also the same year, Nixon declared his infamous War on Drugs, pinning drug abuse as public enemy number one in the United States. Nixon introduces Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention, or SAODAP, led by Dr. Jerome Jaffe. In fact, this is the only time in the history of the War on Drugs most of the funding was directed towards treatment rather than law enforcement. In 1973, the Drug Law Enforcement Administration was established by the Nixon administration, followed by consolidating agents from the BNDD, Customs, and the CIA, and ODALE to assemble a super agency. Ultimately, the DEA became and remains Nixon's legacy. Now, let us travel further down the historical timeline to 1986. The act Ronald Reagan's administration signed into effect, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, issuing the mandatory minimum penalties for drug offenses and charges. Essentially, Nixon's act promoted significant racial disparities in the incarceration numbers due to the differences in sentencing for crack versus powder cocaine. This act, coupled with Reaganomics, undoubtedly promoted systematic oppression and racism, which is why, in my professional and personal estimation, prior administrations of the United States used drugs to combat the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and dissemble what J. Edgar Hoover declared to be the greatest threat to eternal security of the country, the Black Panther Party. In case you have attended a public school district in the United States of America or are blinded by entitlement and privilege and have not heard of the Black Panther Party, I will define the best way possible. The Black Panther Party, originally named Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was founded in 1966 and established to patrol African American neighborhoods to protect residents from acts of police brutality. At the organization's peak in the late 1960s, party membership exceeded 2,000 and operated remote chapters in several major American cities: Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, Richmond, California, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California, Seattle, Washington, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Side note, the 5 U.S. states who housed former Black Panther chapters remain on the list of states carry and conceal laws are not prohibited. California recently issued a partial. With that said, be sure to watch the right and left hand of this issue.
In 2003, a family and I lost a relative to gun violence. Although the motive was extremely petty and cowardly, the overall impact reaches much deeper. Reason? Answer? Naturally. I harbor feelings of loss and grief from losing a relative to such a tragic manner. But as a counselor and mental health professional, I would be remiss if I did not consider the following factors. What was the mental state of the murderer, and did the effects of his childhood and adulthood play a part?
The mental health status of whether a defendant is competent enough to hold trial is routinely preserved for European Americans and Caucasians, and other individuals who identify as white. As commented prior, minorities, specifically African Americans, normally stand trial regardless of circumstances or competence. Why is this important? Response: an occurrence I've dubbed the Barbershop 3 effect. We, as a society, have arrived to such a place to celebrate 48 hours without a single murder taking place. I applaud O'Shea Jackson, or better known as Ice Cube, for the film and depiction of this grim reality. Unfortunately, as a divided society and shattered community, we have transitioned into such an existence that we will get excited about black males not killing each other or honest bystanders in one U.S. city. A city full of potential, but lacking the unity of the lower socioeconomic, middle class, and the wealthy, minority-wise. However, as a word to the wise, the closing of schools, unmediated integration of rival gangs, and the lack of, within adequate pay scale, employment opportunities for all citizens will not solve the problem. At this time, I would like to extend a huge shout out to Chicago's urban prep academies. During an unmotivating experience of graduate studies for a master's in school guidance counseling, I chose to highlight charter schools as an explanation of how we, as a nation, can close the achievement gap existing between black and white students, specifically male students of color. Many kudos to those young men for the 100% graduation rates. Keep up the great work.
Lastly, I share this thought. Across the country, people are treated differently based on the color of their skin or ethnic identification. And at the same time, across the country, people of color can also get killed for wearing a certain color of clothing. Sooner or later, this country requires a conscientious conversation amongst its citizens. we truly have a color complex. As a familiar saying goes, it all starts at home. Concerning the subject of Black women in the U.S., there is no exception to the rule. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2018, there were 11,322,000 single-parent families in the U.S., and 81.5% are headed by single mothers.
And considering the children of those single mothers, roughly 16.4 million children, are growing up without the father at the residence. So in many ways, single mothers must occupy the role of mother and father. And this sense of duality should not be overlooked. The sense of duality has been in effect since the days of slavery. Many female slaves were forced to serve as wet nurses at the demand of slave owners. This was indeed a difficult demand. Not only were these women forced to provide milk for the offspring of slavers and her own young, or in most cases disconnected from her own child or children altogether. And some forms of duality continued post-Emancipation Proclamation and into the workplace of today. Many Black women have to occupy the seat of double minority for company business compliance, endure years of sexism in the workplace and general public, and represent the voice of all other Black people in existence or ever existed. Due to these responsibilities and behavioral assumptions, some African American women have to embrace the notion of superwoman. From this perspective, I offer my appreciation for the Black Girls Rock and Black Girl Magic campaigns of the present day. Regardless of the balancing multiple tasks at home and the workplace, they still find a way to widely support community efforts. So to all the superwomen out there, keep being great. Matter of fact, CJ Ward Creations would not have experienced such success without the support and assistance of Black women. However, I appreciate every supporter of CJWC regardless of gender or ethnicity.
From voting rights to the battle for equal rights, Black women have experienced many pessimistic battles. Equal pay, the freedom to display the beauty of natural hair, being respected rather than objected, and sexual harassment are a few battles to name. With attention to these encounters and more, a constant sense of duality may have eventually transitioned into self-preservation.
This sense of self-preservation really conveys the difficult balance between living and operating as a double minority. Operating in the comfort of her femininity, and she may not be respected by her counterparts. Then, on the flip side of that coin, if she comes off too aggressive, she may experience seclusion from her colleagues or others in the standard workplace environment. Once again, the concept of duality can be read on the walls. For many women, their past can lead others through a multitude of old wounds. Parental absence, due to the parental separation, divorce, parental choice, imprisonment, circumstances, or death. Primary and/or secondary emotional trauma from molestation and cognitive effects associated, denial, acceptance, etc. Body image, personal insecurities, physical body maturing at an early or late age society deems as common. Primary and secondary infidelity, personal relationships, parental or guardian association, trust issues and concerns, abandonment, betrayal, etc. And the list goes on.
Although the sense of duality can be shared by any woman of any ethnicity or background, there are some struggles unique to Black women. Here are just a few.
Body image. Current. Serena Williams, and the French Open ban. In 2018, Serena Williams clutched a huge win at the French Open and secured a Grand Slam victory while wearing a black and red bodysuit. However, instead of Williams' triumph being met with admiration and esteem, she was handed criticism and ridicule by the French Tennis Federation president, who was quoted as stating, "I think that sometimes we've gone too far," and specifically mentioning Williams' suit as reference. Before going any further, how many other women's sports have bodysuits or leotards as uniforms? Gymnastics, athletics for track and field, volleyball, aquatics, swimming, diving, etc., CrossFit, cycling, bodybuilding, wrestling, bobsledding, and the list continues. However, according to Bernard and many other critics, Williams' bodysuit prompted a need for a dress code ban of certain outfits. It will no longer be accepted. One must respect the game and the place, Bernard said.
Serena Williams, please continue to be an influential individual as an athlete, fashion designer, woman, but most of all, as a human being. Congratulations on the Grand Slam victory after returning from childbirth. Respect.
Past, Sarah Bartman. Sarah Bartman was a South African, East Cape, and Cape Town woman who was scouted to be on display as an exhibition because of her large buttocks and genitals. As part of a freak show in Britain and other surrounding areas in the early 1800s under the name Hottentot Venus. If you are unfamiliar with the term Hottentot, look it up when possible. After being degraded and placed on many exhibits throughout the region of Britain, being sold as property, and dying as a slave to her circumstances at the age of 25, that was still not enough for some people, particularly Georges Gavier. Gavier decided to continue the degradation of Bartman by using her remains as an exhibit itself, unbelievably, for over 160 years. Bartman's remains remained on display until Nelson Mandela, during his presidency in South Africa, made a formal request to the French, ironically, for her remains to be returned to South Africa. For whatever reason, it took the French National Assembly 8 years to release her remains. And even then, the French government only returned a portion of the remains.
Sarah Bartman, it brought sorrow and discomfort to hear your story of exploitation, but it does not hold a candle to the sorrow and discomfort you experienced personally. I am glad your remains finally made their way to the Eastern Cape of South Africa. However, I am more appeased to know your story has been unearthed and is finally discussed. Your soul deserves it.
Hair. Current. Natural hair discrimination. In February 2019, New York City became the first city to institute a discrimination ban based on natural hair. And in April of 2019, California became the first state to issue a ban on discrimination of natural hairstyles. Natural hair, or natural hairstyles, meaning treated or untreated hairstyles such as locks or dreadlocks, cornrows, twists, braids, bantu knots, fades, afros, and or the right to keep hair in an uncut or untrimmed state. Pertaining to New York City, the guidelines obtained by the New York Times before their public release are based on the argument that hair is inherent to one's race and can be closely associated to racial, ethnic, or cultural identities, and therefore protected under the city's human rights laws, which outlaw discrimination on the basis of race, gender, national origin, religion, and other protected classes. To date, there is no legal precedent in federal court for the protection of hair. Indeed, last spring, the United States Supreme Court refused an NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund request to review a case in which a black woman, Chastity Jones, had her job offer rescinded in 2010 at an Alabama insurance company after she refused to cut off her dreadlocks. But New York City's Human Rights Commission is one of the most progressive in the nation. It recognizes many more areas of discrimination than federal law, including in employment, housing, pregnancy, and marital status. Its Legal Enforcement Bureau can conduct investigations and has the ability to subpoena witnesses and prosecute violations. There's nothing keeping us from calling out these policies prohibiting natural hair or hairstyles most closely associated to black people, said Carmen P. Malalis, the commissioner and chairman of the New York City Commission of Human Rights. They are based on racist standards of appearance, Ms. Malalis continued, saying that they perpetuate racist stereotypes that black hairstyles are unprofessional or improper. In New York, it isn't difficult to find black women and men who can speak about how their hair has affected their lives in both subtle and substantial ways, ranging from vile comments from co-workers to ultimatums from bosses to look more professional or find another job. Stowe, 2019. And relating to the state of California, the bill would update the definition of race used in existing law to be inclusive of traits historically associated with race, including, but not limited to, hair texture and protective hairstyles. In a society in which hair has historically been one of many determining factors of a person's race, and whether they were a second-class citizen, hair today remains a proxy for race, the bill says. Therefore, hair discrimination targeting hairstyles associated with race is racial discrimination. The measure, known as the Crown Act, an acronym for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair, was introduced by the state senator Holly Mitchell of Los Angeles, a Democrat. Governor Newsom's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Friday. This is a fundamental issue of personal dignity and personal rights, Ms. Mitchell said in an interview on Friday. This bill has truly struck a deep personal chord with people because there is something so deeply personally offensive when you are told that your hair, in its natural state, is not acceptable in the workplace. Ms. Mitchell said the bill seeks to ban employers and schools from enforcing grooming policies that claim to be race neutral, but in reality have the disproportionate impact on people of color. She said she had been stopped on the street and had received letters from black people, many of them parents, who had shared stories of themselves or their children being singled out by bosses or by teachers because of the texture or style of their hair. I have heard from parents whose children has been sent home from school because they were told their hair was unruly, Ms. Mitchell said, or even more comically from my perspective, that their hair was a distraction to other children. Other children are distracted, so you have to leave. The bill points to the history of anti-black racism in the United States and the role it has played in shaping Eurocentric beauty standards and ideas of what constitutes a professional appearance. Professionalism was and still is closely linked to European features and mannerisms, which entails that those who do not naturally fall into the Eurocentric norms must alter their appearance, sometimes drastically and permanently, in order to be deemed as professional, the bill says. The bill also highlights what it calls a shortcoming of anti-discrimination law. Federal courts have ruled that the law protects African Americans when they are discriminated against for wearing their hair in afros, but not when they wear it in other natural hairstyles, or in braids, twists, or locks. A proposal to ban discrimination on the basis of hair in the workplace, housing, and public schools was introduced in the New Jersey legislature this week. That measure was in part a response to an episode last December when a black high school wrestler was forced to cut his dreadlocks ringside or else forfeit a match. In February, the New York City Commission on Human Rights issued new guidelines that ban discrimination on the basis of hair or hairstyle at work, at school, or in public accommodations. Ms. Mitchell, who has worn her hair in a natural style for 20 years, says she recently found a picture of herself and her mother at a 1982 high school graduation. In the photo, her hair was styled naturally. 30 years ago, when I was in high school in Riverside, a pretty conservative, predominantly white school, there was never a question as to whether or not my hair was appropriate, she said. Here we are years later, and black girls are being sent home for their hair being in violation of school dress code. I'm not sure how that happened, but now it hopefully won't anymore. Stack, 2019. Pass, code switching. By definition, code switching is the modifying of one's behavior, appearance, etc. to adapt to different sociocultural norms. And for decades, African American women have had to modify their behavior and appearance in order to integrate into corporate images, societal standards, and politically correct branding, etc. Basically, the assumption is, the more closely an African American or black woman appears to resemble a white woman, the greater chance of integration. Mainstream, corporate, and/or company setting. These claims are validated by the fact the dominant culture in regards to institutional leverage of America are descendants of Europe or racially identified as white. In the event the validation of claims seems overboard, the truth of the matter is solidified based on the following observation. Fact that in 2019, discrimination bans on natural hair or hairstyles is a current topic of discussion speaks volumes and points out the oversized and humongous elephant in the room, nationally and internationally.
I would like to uplift the memory of Madam C.J. Walker and her efforts in entrepreneurism for empowering others and serving as a civil rights advocate. As a black man, raised around the influence of black women, creating and distributing healthcare products for yourself and many other minority women, thank you for your lasting influence.
Equality. Current. Justice for Sandra Bland. On July 10th, 2015, Sandra Bland, a 28-year-old native of Chicago, Illinois, was brutally arrested in Waller County, Texas, by Brian Encinia, a former state trooper in Texas, after being pulled over for a traffic violation. 3 days later, on July 13th, Sandra was found dead, hanging in her jail cell from a presumed suicide. Prior to the arrest, on that same day, Bland officially accepted a position at Prairie View A&M University. However, rather than being able to experience a full day of celebration and enjoyment for her new role at a university, it transitioned into her facing the numb feeling of confinement and loss of personal freedoms. Unfortunately, oftentimes, this is the fate of many African American women and girls, especially when considering 1 in 18 black women are likely to experience imprisonment versus the stats of a white woman, which is 1 in 111. Latino women, 1 in 45, and all women, 1 in 56 together. This is an institutional occurrence that has been going on for years, specifically in the institution of education. From an early age, many black women and girls are singled out for pretentious dress code violations, unequal behavioral complaints by biased staff members and vindictive teachers, higher amount of behavioral referrals resulting in greater suspension and in-school suspension rates, and the overall lack of advocacy for student success. However, when many of these young women press through and graduate, dress code violations turn into citations. Behavioral complaints become court records, behavioral referrals transition into arrests, and the lack of advocacy for student success transfers to slogans that suggest Black Lives Matter. To all those affected, please continue to stand strong and never give up. Regardless of the isolating feeling, just know this educator cares.
Dear Sandy, congratulations on taking the leap of faith to pursue a better life, attaining employment at your alma mater, and getting a few steps closer to experiencing emotional stability and financial security. It was a true misfortune to the society and world to lose such a talented and determined young mind. You could have very well been my wife, partner, sister, cousin, friend, classmate, or fellow trombonist in the same band. So your loss I made personal. And from one brother to a fellow sister, your life mattered, and I will continue to keep your name alive. Sandra Annette Blaine.
Over the years, there has been an erroneous stereotype for black women and girls being diagnosed with the angry black woman syndrome, promoted through media, society, and bigotry. This popularized syndrome created another form of prejudice and prejudgment throughout the social fabric of this nation, stemming from years of being referred to as sassy or sapphire. The black women and many girls were viewed as dominant and aggressive, specifically during slavery and Jim Crow. This ideology can be viewed as a societal slap to the face for every courageous woman who ever fought for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness while living and surviving on the very soil of this Declaration of Independence. Now, in this century, black women and girls are ridiculed for being survivors and defying the social odds impressed upon them. From the classy First Lady, Mrs. Michelle Obama, being taunted on Facebook by a couple of West Virginians, to the asinine verbal jabs directed towards the elegant Serena Williams and her athletic physique. The struggle continues. However, I believe the sophisticated Miss Obama expressed the best way to combat these foolish slurs. Women, as Mrs. Obama stated, we endure those cuts in so many ways that we don't even notice we're cut, she said. We are living with small, tiny cuts, and we are bleeding every single day, and we're still getting up. At the end of the day, by staying true to the me I've always known, I found that this journey has been incredibly freeing, she added at her commencement address. Because no matter what happened, I've had the peace of mind of knowing that all of the chatter, the name calling, the doubting, all of it was just noise. It did not define me. First Lady Michelle Obama, Weiss, 2017.
Women have been my greatest supporters amongst any group of people, specifically African American and Black females, elderly and young alike. from serving as academic supports throughout my adolescent years, peer support throughout my undergraduate experiences, and advocates of my professional pursuits as an adult. I appreciate you all for making this man feel like his existence is important. In addition to the caring white women who offer genuine kindness and love, rather than the alternative, I'm truly grateful for your spirit of influence. Thank you for your caring spirit. It certainly makes a difference in this man's life. Matter of fact, to everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background, whoever offered an unbiased spirit instead of evil intent, you rock. Before diving into the topic of education as it relates to a conscientious conversation, let us begin by defining the constructs.
Public education. A school that is maintained at public expense for the education of the children of a community or district, and that constitutes a part of a system of free public education, commonly including primary and secondary schools. Private education. A school funded, conducted, and maintained by a private group rather than by the government, usually charging tuition and often following a particular philosophy, viewpoint, etc. Data source, dictionary.com. Observing the definition of public education, we should highlight the following concepts: maintained at public expense, and part of a system of free public education. And when it comes to the definition of private education, let us consider the following: funded, conducted, and maintained by a private group, and following a particular philosophy, viewpoint, etc. Private group and particular philosophy brings about a specific concern. Who is clearly identified as the private group, and what is the foundation of the particular philosophy? This is important to clarify, especially when analyzing the puppet masters pulling the strings, or the true stockholders influencing lives of so many young persons full of potential on a regular basis.
Roughly 85% of my knowledge was a result of self-education, rather than the 20 plus years of public and private education. Self-education and life experiences have undoubtedly assisted my life's journey and decision-making process. I point this out due to the current education model of teaching and learning strategies. It was not until I took a step back to analyze my thought process and patterns and approach to personal improvement did I recognize the fallacy. According to your level of education and social support systems, will strongly influence your methodology. For the sake of clarification, please check out this example.
Traditionally, in terms of education, the teacher teaches, the student retains information, teacher grades students' retention of information, student is given permission to proceed to the next level of education. In theory, this model should be a feasible system of education. However, this model does not offer cultural responsibility or unbiased teaching strategies. Therefore, the traditional student has a 20% chance of receiving a quality education and only a 5% chance of getting a fair opportunity to attain approval from the current population of teachers. It should be noted, however, that while the population of the U.S. students has doubled in the past few years, the population of U.S. teachers has tripled. This leads some to suggest that there are too many. In fact, in some areas, it is extremely difficult to entice teachers to work. These figures draw concern since they are not keeping up with the racial makeup of the United States. Schools that are predominantly Hispanic and Black might be lucky to have 1 or 2 teachers who are from their culture, and thus represent role models for our community. Concern for a lack of adequate cultural representation is especially great in urban areas. Children living in poverty are more at risk for criminal behavior. With fewer teacher role models who are of the same culture, the attempt to join gangs or simply lose interest in school is more prevalent. Like all people, children need connections, community, and a sense of belonging. In neighborhoods predominantly by one race, teachers of the same race may help provide a sense of community, which those of a different race may not provide. There are noted exceptions, yet many hope to encourage more minorities to teach, so minorities have more representation in education. And this is from what percent of the U.S. population do teachers comprise? 2019.
Before addressing this topic, I would like to begin by defining the term. What is homeschooling?
Answer. Homeschooling is a progressive movement around the country and the world in which parents choose to educate their children at home instead of sending them to a traditional public or private school. Families choose to homeschool for a variety of reasons, including dissatisfaction with the educational options available, different religious beliefs, or educational philosophies, and the belief that children are not progressing within the traditional school structure. Martin, 2012.
Based on personal experience as a teacher, guidance counselor, mental health specialist, coach, mentor, and club sponsor in the public and private sector of education, and according to the statistics for homeschool students, I completely understand parents' desire to choose homeschooling over public and private education.
However, rather than using my personal opinions to sway this conscientious conversation, I will share the benefits and advantages of homeschooling from the perspective of others.
Tailored instruction. In a class of 20 to 30 students, not all of the students in the class can receive all of the attention and assistance they need from one teacher. Many teachers love the one-on-one interaction they get to have with their students, but they can also find it very frustrating when they feel they can't give the individualized attention they feel that each student needs. Not all students learn the same way, but a public school teacher can only differentiate instruction so much for a class of 20 to 30 students. Choosing your child's curriculum. There are a number of curriculum options for parents to choose from. If you know how your child learns best, then you can choose a curriculum that is tailored to their specific learn style and educational needs. If you're customizing the curriculum for your child, an added advantage is the ability to accelerate learning in the areas where your child excels. For example, your child might be great at English but not so great in math. If this is the case, your child might be advancing at an 8th grade level of English while right on target at a 5th grade level in math. In a public school environment, the teacher bases instruction off of curriculum that they're responsible to get their students through. Unfortunately, there is a risk of students getting behind because they didn't master a skill before moving on to one that required mastery of the previous skill. Homeschooling and individualized instruction means that a student gets the attention they need and the assistance they need to master the skills required before moving on to the next skill. Flexible learning schedule and environment. Public school students experience what often feels like a grueling day in and day out schedule of arriving at school in the morning, sitting through 8 hours of classes, then go home in the afternoon. If you have a full-time job, you probably work at your job at least 40 hours per week. Just think about how students experience the same amount of time at school each week and how they often have homework which requires additional time outside of school. Many students find the classroom to be a very dull and cold environment that doesn't motivate learning. Teachers can decorate their rooms to alleviate some of this concern, but it rarely alleviates all of it. The typical student desk in a school is incredibly uncomfortable, and yet it's the place a student has to sit all day long. With homeschooling, you get to decide how to schedule your child's daily instruction, and it doesn't have to take nearly as much time in a day as it does in public school. You could start in the morning, or you could start in the afternoon and still have their daily instruction finished in time for other activities. A flexible learning schedule means more time for other things such as extracurricular activities or family time. Experiential learning, flexibility in learning environment is also great because your child's learning time doesn't have to be limited to the home. Students who are homeschooled often have more opportunity to participate in experiential learning activities that get them more engaged than they would be in a classroom. For example, your child could learn more about science by taking a nature walk than by filling out a worksheet, and the flexibility you have means that you can plan a nature walk or other field trips that would contribute to whatever your child is learning at home. There's also the opportunity to teach your child through project-based learning by allowing them to develop important life skills through projects that they're genuinely interested in and require complex thinking and doing. Experiential learning is a benefit that allows a student to learn and have fun at the same time. Independent thinking and character formation. Students in public school are often victims of groupthink, where students as a whole decide to behave in a certain way because they believe that it is the best and only way to belong to the group. Students feel the pressure to assume a certain type of identity that may or may not be their own and behave a certain way in order to feel like they are a part of something important. Unfortunately, the peer pressure that students face doesn't tend to lead students in a healthy life direction. Students often find themselves in the midst of a social hierarchy in public schools, and this leads to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. Some students fall victim to bullying, which compounds the problem. With the social pressure that is created by the public school environment, it becomes very difficult for students to devote the attention and engagement they need to in their learning process. Homeschooling allows you to create an environment where your child can be distanced from the negative peer pressure and bad influences that are found in the public school environment. If your child is with you each day, you have the opportunity to encourage them and help them develop a self-image that doesn't depend on the opinions of others. When you send your child to public school, they're not just learning academics, they're learning how to interact in the world. Unfortunately, how to interact in the world isn't typically an intentional component of a child's education in public school. Instead, it's caught by the way students interact with one another. Closer family relationships. Though it's not likely to be all wonderful all the time, homeschooling does give you the opportunity to build a strong, enduring bond with your child. You'll be available each day as a solid support for your child, and you won't have to miss out any of the important moments of discovery that your child experiences. Social benefits. Many people assume that homeschooled children end up having antisocial tendencies because they're never around other kids their own age. However, this is a common misconception because parents who are intentional about getting their children involved in homeschool groups with other kids or extracurricular activities end up helping their kids be just as social, and sometimes even more social, than kids who are in public school. A homeschooled child's social ability is largely dependent upon a parent creating or finding the opportunities for their child to develop their social skills. Because homeschooled children interact with their adult parent most of the time each day, they tend to be better at interacting with other adults than public school students. Learning with your child. If you decide to homeschool, you'll be teaching your child every subject they need to learn, and chances are that you're not certified in any of the subjects. Homeschooling gives you the opportunity as the teacher the added benefit of learning new information and skills right alongside your child. Academic excellence. Studies have shown that students who are homeschooled tend to perform better academically overall than public school students. When it comes to standardized testing, homeschooled students tend to score 15 to 30 percentage points higher than public school students. An interesting finding is that homeschooled students tend to perform better than public school students whether their teaching parent is a certified teacher or not. Homeschooling seems to produce students who are smarter and more mature than their public school counterparts. FAR, 2014.
The authors of this presented information concerning homeschooling shared a wealth of informative material and claims supporting the advantages and benefits of homeschooling compared to the traditional means of education, public and private. However, at the end of the day, the most important factors to be considered, what is the best option for your student or students? I believe the potential of today's youth is worth exploring the most feasible option for academic and educational success.
School is an institution, and so is the penal system. Therefore, voluntary institutionalization of the idea of systems. Homeschooling. Are you exercising your right to freedom and not allowing your children to experience certain limits and barriers during their learning process?
The institution of education in America has only taught me how the world views me as an N-word. That is why I have literally hated school since the first grade. And my feelings have yet to change, which is the reason I chose education as a career for so many years. It was my way of making a difference in the life or lives of those students who would have been mistreated and or underrepresented otherwise. Looking back, my elementary experience presented many unknown mental attacks and silent social programming. The only class or grade I can honestly say brought me joy, excitement, or any other feeling of belonging was kindergarten. After kindergarten, every following class or grade went downhill, and I was forced to attend an environment of harm instead of help.
Cages in school, stronger or stiffer disciplinary standards, etc.
Furthermore, my decision to self-publish non-traditional dissertations,
Cognitive and Behavioral Therapy, Road to Recovery, the Core Theory, the Cognitive and Behavioral Approach to Counseling and Physical Rehabilitation, and PhD, Doctorate of Philosophy, A Conscientious Conversation, were mainly due to a layoff. Although I was accepted into a doctoral program, Counseling Psychology Research at the University of Louisville, it greatly placed a hindrance on my motivation to attend a traditional institution of education for a doctoral program. Instead, I decided to develop a curriculum, or a programmatic model, through a self-guided philosophy, mind, body, and soul, core theory.
In conclusion, consider this. The United States has made humongous leaps and bounds concerning technology, but the framework for traditional education has not changed since 1635. Boston Latin School, Boston, Massachusetts.
However, due to charter schools and alternative learning environments, many students have been given an opportunity not allotted to many of us prior to 1991. Bluffview Montessori Schools, Winona, Minnesota. And based on these new opportunities for educational and academic advancement, I believe the educational systems of the U.S. deserve a conscientious conversation for the sake of the youth.
Before traveling down the road of murky waters, let us begin with the definition of media.
Media, the main means of mass communication, broadcasting, publishing, and the internet, regarded collectively. Source, wordsandspace.net.
Not sure about your mental approach to defining terminology or breakdown of information, but I'll normally begin by gaining a better understanding or paying attention to identifying words. With that stated, the words like mass communication and collectively immediately stand out.
Mass communication is communication directed to or reaching the masses. Collectively is defined as denoting a number of persons or things considered as one group, or whole flock is a collective word, or formed by collecting. Based on these defining principles and the stakeholders of media effects in America, which group of people is considered to be the masses? The majority, correct? Sure, we can agree the majority in Northern America encompasses the white European American. In addition, which group of people is society tailored to fit? Hint, this group never has to consider or worry about changing any settings in their smartphone or tablet to send thumbs up or any other hand emojis to identify their skin tone or likeness. It comes as standard practice. From this vantage point, a person with honest eyes and senses can determine the reason behind media programming in the United States of America. The basis of media influence was and has always been catered to the white European American. For example, many Western films portraying white actors fighting against other white actors depicting Native Americans, while Tears on Trails were still damp. Regardless of a person's ethnicity, anyone who has walked across an entire country while being beaten, ridiculed, malnourished, and dehumanized should be able to provide their own narrative, but not in this case. Rather than Hollywood and the mass communication of the time, radio, portraying the truth, they created one, better known as the Great White Hope. And the GWH phenomenon exceeds beyond cultural barriers, but also time barriers, historical events, and global influence. For example, the infamous moon landing of 1969. The speculation of whether the event actually occurred or not, or if it was a conspiracy to secure presumptive international dominance over the Soviet Union, remains a common debate amongst supporters and critics alike. Regardless of the historical facts of validation concerning the United States have been shared through many instances, the elite must remain elite. The persuasive tactics of radio propaganda, TV programming, and media marketing, the driving force of psychological schemes, continue to build speed through social media platforms. Say too much about one particular group, user information is tagged as inappropriate or offensive. If someone really ruffles a few feathers, they run the risk of account deactivation. Why is this important? Response: the foundational principles of free speech. In my estimation, the age of technology is here with no plans of fading out. The evolutionary strides of artificial intelligence, AI, surveillance, and military combat by drones, and the release of information concerning alien existence controls the market. Tangible matter is quickly growing obsolete, similar to cursive handwriting in public schools. As government-regulated information from the newspaper and other publication giants of yesteryear, the same form of regulation is undeniably present in the age of cyberspace.
In 2017, I conducted a doctoral research study entitled Mental Health Awareness and the Influence of Social Media, highlighting the cognitive and behavioral impacts of social media based on identity of self, social networking, and inclusion.
During this study, I discovered empathy and social acceptance to be the main factors regarding healthy lifestyles and mental health. Based on the findings and data collection, comprehension of online regulation, materials deemed as offensive and considered as safe, should not be ignored or overlooked. Always keep in mind, and the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Hint, the legislative regulations encouraged by the general public for select groups will ultimately be the mandates for the general public.
Lastly, cyber safety is extremely important, but cyber freedom is absolutely vital. Check out the following information from the U.S. Census Bureau.
On average, 21.3% of Americans participated in at least one government assistance program. 43% of Americans signed up for welfare programs have been participating for over 3 years. Over half of Americans receiving housing assistance have been enrolled for over 3 years. Only 10% of Americans receiving housing assistance passed the requirements for housing assistance over 3 years. 39% of children under the age of 18 participated in some form of government assistance program since 2012. 43% of Medicaid recipients were white, 18% were African American, and 30% were Hispanic in 2016, according to Kaiser Family Foundation. 41.6% of the African American population and 36.4% of the Hispanic population participated in at least one government assistance program in any given month. This is from Lexington Law, 45 Important Welfare Statistics for 2019.
During the 1970s, a movie was released entitled Claudine, portraying the life of a garbage collector and a single mother of 6 on welfare. The film's overview is centered around a single mother on welfare in Harlem, New York, and the hardships associated with being a recipient of welfare. However, based on the film, I received difficulties of single-family homes and the systematic barriers of the welfare system and government assistance. Without divulging the plot or storyline, here are a few takeaways.
Movie situation. The eldest son is confused and frustrated with family circumstances. Real life situations. The youth are the open targets. Stop and frisk, gang activity, etc. Movie situation. The eldest daughter being available for outside temptation or temptations. Real life situation. Being a single parent often means working long hours to provide for children and other family members or friends. At times, leaving the children with others, babysitters, relatives, friends, etc., or by themselves. Movie situation. The youngest son feeling invincible and undervalued. Real life situation. The need for children to feel safe and protected, which is why community initiatives and programs are vital. For instance, programs like WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, a product of the Black Panther Party. Movie situation. The mother forced to hide new purchases while covering up her relationship with a working man. Real life situation. The great need and demand for the Welfare Reform Act and temporary assistance to needy families, or TANF. Movie situation. The male love interest, dealing with child support roles, welfare restrictions, and guidelines associated with government assistance. Real life situation. The stringent process of child support and welfare for a large number of U.S. citizens, particularly Commonwealth states.
Based on observations of family dynamics and structures, while serving as a counselor, mentor, teacher, instructor, coach, and program sponsor, here are a few reflections.
The modern family structure, as it relates to parental involvement and roles within schools. African Americans, or Black, 50% female or male dominant role. Single mother, grandparent, or close relative, single father, father or mother dynamic, rare, but not as rare as generally portrayed. Latino or Hispanic, 99.8% father or eldest male dominant role, single mother, grandparent or close relative, single father, father or mother dynamic, common. European American or white, 50% male or female dominant role, single mother, grandparent or close relative, single father, father-mother dynamic common, but not as common as generally portrayed. Asian American, Pacific Islander, 99.8% father or eldest male dominant role, single mother, grandparent or close relative, a single father, father-mother dynamic common. African and Indian, 99.8% father or eldest male dominant role, single mother, grandparent or close relative, single father, father-mother dynamic common.
Now you understand that if you get married, we might drop Mrs. Price from the program, but this will be determined after your financial status has been computed by us. It has nothing to do with age of the children. You understand?
Now, if you will sign this statement, it shows your income and your expenses, Mr. Marshall, and get it back to me within 2 weeks. You understand?
Yes, I understand all that. But listen, I gotta ask you something because I gotta think about this thing. What happens if I lose my job?
If you're married, you must apply for welfare.
I must apply for welfare?
You must apply for welfare. Otherwise, this would constitute a misuse of ADC funds.
Which is fraud.
You understand? If the husband's unwilling or unable to make a contribution equal to what it would cost him to maintain an independent living arrangement, he must apply for welfare. Do you understand? Otherwise, this would constitute a misuse of ADC funds.
Which is fraud.
Which is misappropriation.
Which is fraud.
Right, okay, now wait a minute. Now, if I marry this lady, I want to make things better. But if I spend $1 on it, you're going to deduct it from her, right? If I want to buy a little something extra, you're going to deduct it. And I better report every penny I spend, or else I'm a crook. Okay, now you say, if I lose my job, I must apply for welfare because I can't just sit around and eat the government's biscuit.
Which is fraud.
It's called, that's a fraud, right? Okay, now, if I do go on the welfare, then I'm just another lazy-ass nigga and living off taxpayer. All right, now, suppose I do not marry this lady. Now, if I move in with her and do not tell you, then we're both crooks, right? But if I do tell you, then we're back to the income and the outcome and the deducting, and you drive me to drink. And you call a fraud if I spend $7 for a bottle of whiskey. Come on, buddy, let's get out. You can't win. Understand? Fraud.
Don't you hear me? Don't come there. Stay away.
Fraud. You're foolish that man out of the house because it ain't worth the crap you got along through.
I guess I ain't.
Who says you ain't? You bring the kids to my house Saturday night, we'll make the announcement official.
Fraud!
As a former collegiate student athlete, the topic of medication is an ongoing debate. Also, as a secondary source of family members and those in the category of 6 degrees of separation who are prescribed to ingest and inject drugs and medications into their bodies on a consistent basis. This subject is personal. During these observations, I formed a distinct disgust for majority of the prescribed medications on the market, continued and discontinued. Then, on the other hand, I have been in environments where over-the-counter drugs were abused. White powdered secret societies hiding in plain sight, using nonverbal cues for communication, and social gatherings drowned out by the floods of liquid courage, better known as alcohol. Regardless of the vice, overindulging is overindulging. Regardless of the horse you choose to saddle. This concern leads me to the following question: which is worse, licit or illicit? For this inquiry, I will use my normal format of definition first.
Sometimes when words are used over and over again, they can lose their meaning, or the depth of its meaning gets lost. For instance, some people might know that the phrase illicit drugs refer to drugs that are illegal or forbidden. However, many people don't realize that these drugs are not only illegal to use, but they are also illegal to sell and make. This article will review the differences between licit and illicit drugs, and why drugs have been classified as illegal. The meaning licit means within the law. In other words, anything that is licit is allowed or legal. Licit drugs include alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine. It is legal to purchase and use these substances. Legal drug use include prescription drugs that are used according to the doctor's instructions, as well as by the person for whom it was prescribed. Legal drugs also include medicines used for illness and over-the-counter drugs when used as directed. However, illicit drugs are those that have been classified as illegal because they pose a threat to one's health and, in some cases, their life. As a result, these drugs might also be dangerous to society as well as the national and even global economy. Licit versus illicit drug use, 2018. Examples of illicit drugs include heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, crack cocaine, LSD, ecstasy, mushrooms, and PCP. Using this foundation of sorts, which medication or prescriptions are classified as licit or illicit? Over the years, civilizations and societies have experimented with many forms of medical remedies to heal or treat disease and illness. For instances, ancient China, 7,000 to 6,000 BCE, used medicinal alcohol known as Yao Jin to promote blood warming and vitalizing. Too far back? If so, how about the Pharaonic Egypt, 3400 BCE, where beer and wine was popularly considered as a necessity of life? How about Greece, 5th and 4th century, when wine was viewed as a therapeutic agent for bad breath, cancer, wounds, and to loosen bowels? And this remedy continued Roman Empire, 2nd century, Middle Ages, 1000 to 1500 AD, and so on. Rourke, 2017. In addition, the United States was not excused from this treatment. Even during Prohibition, certain alcoholic beverages were prescribed for many ailments and diseases. However, due to a past resolution at the annual American Medical Association meeting in June 1917, it created a supportive push to initiate prohibition in the first place. But I digress. How is this relevant? Response: this is nothing new under the sun. So, when the debate concerning the legalization of marijuana really grew legs, I could not help but think, history always seems to repeat itself. Just using an updated pair of gloves to hold the topic of discussion.
To highlight how history repeats itself, I will cite a quantitative source. As usual, definition first.
Medical marijuana has a higher CBD content, so when you're taking it, you don't feel the euphoria that's associated with this recreational counterpart. Note, Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has yet to prove or recognize the plant as a medicine, but future prophets, historically, have a way of swaying decisions. The end of alcohol prohibition is a perfect example. Recreational marijuana is pot that is used without medical justification. Recreational marijuana usually has more THC content than the medicinal variety, as this is what provides user with a high. The main differences between medical and recreational marijuana. There are various differences between the two different types of marijuana. These main differences include medical weed usually contains a higher CBD content than recreational. This means when you're taking it, you don't feel as high that's associated with the recreational variety, even though there's no actual difference between the concentrates and flowers of both types. Medical edible potency is frequently higher than its recreational counterpart. Recreational weed typically contains a higher THC content than medical. This means people usually take this variety more for a higher effect than the benefits. You need a recommendation for medical marijuana. Recreational marijuana can be bought by anyone. However, you need to have a qualifying condition to get a medical marijuana recommendation, and this must be renewed regularly. This is a key difference between medical and recreational marijuana. You don't need a recommendation for recreational marijuana. You can go into any recreational dispensary and buy what you need, if that's legal in your state, and you're over the required minimum age. No medical card is required to buy recreational variety, which is another significant medical marijuana versus recreational contrast. You need to be over 18 to purchase medical marijuana from a dispensary. Although you must be 18 or over to buy medical marijuana for yourself, there are certain circumstances where people under 18 can apply for a medical marijuana card. These vary from state to state, so it's crucial to do your research if it applies to you. You need to be over 21 to purchase recreational marijuana from a dispensary. To buy recreational marijuana in states where it is legal, you must prove that you're over 21. If you live in a state where recreational pot is legal and you're over 21, you can easily obtain the drug by simply walking into a dispensary with your driver's license and buy it. In legal states, you can also possess pot or even grow it if you're over 21. You can buy medical marijuana from a regulated dispensary. Medical weed can be obtained from any medical pot dispensary. You can buy recreational pot from a dispensary if they're legal in your state. You can obtain recreational weed either from a dispensary or it can often be found alternately off the street. What is the difference between medical and recreational marijuana 2017? If you are an enthusiast of historical facts and information, this section is for you. Feel free to resort back to the history of medicinal alcohol to compare and contrast. Medical marijuana, the first mention of marijuana historically coming from a book written pharmacologist and an emperor of China. In 2737 BC, he wrote about how cannabis could be used to treat constipation, gout, malaria, and poor memory. Cannabis began spreading through South Asia between 1000 BC and 2000 BC. During this time, the drug was used in India and was described in an ancient poem of one of the herbs, which release us from anxiety. Nowadays, many doctors are prescribing medical marijuana for a variety of conditions. These include pain, nausea, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, mental health conditions, and more. As marijuana's medical benefits slowly become clear, people also started noticing the drug's euphoric effects. Recreational marijuana in 430 BCE, there are reports of a nomadic tribe using cannabis both spiritually and recreationally. The drug's psychoactive effects may be what led these people to inhale cannabis during funerals. The 12th century anthology, 1001 Nights, proves that the Arabs were aware of the drug's intoxicating and arousing effects. Hashish smoking became popular in the Middle East during this time. In 1843, the Hashish Club was founded. The group met monthly for drug-induced experiences, mostly with hashish. Americans were introduced to the idea of using cannabis recreationally after 1910. An influx of Spanish-speaking immigrants brought the drug to America. Shortly after, in 1937, cannabis was deemed as a crime under the Marijuana Tax Act. Today, recreational marijuana use is mainstream across North America. In 2017, poll found that 52% of Americans over 18 had tried cannabis. Moreover, 44% of those people still use the drug today. Medical marijuana versus recreational. What's the difference? 2019. The debate between medical versus recreational, or whether marijuana should be illegal or not, is rather futile and elementary. However, millions of nonviolent offenders serving time or have served for small quantities or amounts for personal use should be priority number one for legislation. What else can an average law-abiding citizen say when majority of Congress can decline a meeting dedicated to the first responders of 9/11? borrowing for the profound lyrics of the legendary and influential Marvin Gaye. What is going on? So, who really benefits from this ongoing travesty? According to American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, statistics reveal a compelling story. Marijuana arrests account for 52% of drug arrests in the United States. During the span of time between 2001 and 2010, 8.2 million individuals were arrested, and 80% were arrested simply for having marijuana. In addition, the data undoubtedly projected the obvious racial bias attached. Blacks, or African Americans, are 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than white and European Americans. Marijuana arrests by numbers, no date. 1.5 incarcerated people is locked up for a drug offense. 451,000 are incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses on any given day. State prisons, 198,000. Local jails, 118,000 unconvicted, 35,000 convicted. Federal, 81,000. Bureau of Prisons, 16,000 U.S. Marshals. Youth, 2,500. Military, 90. There are over 1 million drug possession arrests each year. There are 6 times as many arrests for drug possession as for drug sales. Arrests in millions, 1980 through 2017. Also, based on the information provided by the ACLU, some states like New York have largely ended the war on drugs, excluding racial profiling and stop and frisk. And in other states, such as Oklahoma, full steam ahead. Sawyer and Wagner, 2019. Another fact, hard to overlook, data does not lie. However, in many cases, information can be swayed to cater the presenter. Admittedly, I do have a certain influence in terms of a conscientious conversation, fair treatment for all lives. As a respect to sharing perspectives of others, I recently read a well-versed column for the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, by Mr. Simon Smith.
Legal marijuana is an overwhelmingly white industry whose promises on racial equity have been left unfulfilled, Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, wrote in a piece for USA Today. She added, as case in point, people of color made up to 86% of marijuana arrests in New York in 2017. These figures stand in stark contrast to estimates suggesting that those who hold licenses today in this growing industry are roughly 99% white. You can see not dissimilar inequities play out among consumers, too. Here in Denver, Colorado, though recreational marijuana has been legal since 2012, it's not uncommon to see Black and Latinos and natives hide their joints and edibles while white folks openly puff and pass. The policy nexus of pot and people of color is now a popular Democratic talking point as we near 2020. Presidential candidates Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren and several of the other 9 POTUS hopefuls are calling for the legalization of marijuana and speak to the scourge of racism in policing when it comes to cannabis. The war on drugs has not been a war on drugs, it's been a war on people, and disproportionately people of color and low-income individuals, Booker said this week. And speaking on a radio show on Monday, Sanders said too many people have been unfairly ensnared by this country's pot policies. Too many lives are being destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people get criminal records. You know why? Because they have smoked marijuana, he said. That's insane. Insane, indeed, which is why it makes sense that, as Clark put it, those impacted should be given first-in-line access to licensing and job opportunities in this booming industry. One more suggestion, for every pot brownie or vegan cannabis cookie Whole Foods will inevitably sell,
the mega company should vow to pay a portion of the legal fees to help free a person who is in a cage right now simply for having once had weed, the product they want to get in on. It's the right thing to do. Also, they should just lower their prices. Goodness knows they'll be the most expensive option around because, let's be honest here, they already are for everything else. Smith, 2019. Well, before that happens, before Amazon-owned Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and all manner of opulent, upscale grocers start selling pot brownies to their deep-pocketed patrons, every non-violent marijuana-related conviction should be expunged, and those still incarcerated for marijuana crimes should be immediately released. Before a single Wall Street-loving yacht owner makes another dollar off a demonized plant with long-known medicinal properties, every single person who was thrown into the criminal justice system for enjoying it should get their lives back as much as possible. It's the Black, brown, and Native American people who still suffer from arrests, despite decriminalization and even legalization, and arrest records tied to the possession of the very same product which this entitled gaggle of money grubbers are slated to make billions off of over the next 10 to 20 years. And any kind of conviction in this land of backward laws can make it nearly impossible for a person to land a job, get an apartment, handle money, volunteer, vote, or work in the legalized marijuana industry. In the meantime, rich white people are raking it in. Even universities are getting in on the action. Northern Michigan University, for example, offers a 4-year degree in marijuana. We're providing a fast track to get into the industry, Brandon Canfield, a chemistry professor at the school, said. But for whom? Usually not those doing time for possession of marijuana. Here's an idea, though: offer free tuition at Northern Michigan University, and all universities with marijuana majors and minors, for those who have been savagely ripped from their families and friends and had their lives damaged by the criminal justice system simply because they were black, brown, or native and had pot on their person. It can only help, given how white the entire industry is shaping up to be. For years, the rich, white and powerful have demonized marijuana and those who smoke it, eat it, or dribble CBD oil in their tea. They labeled it a gateway drug, limited research into its medicinal uses, designed and implemented policies that over-criminalized its possession. 88% of marijuana arrests between 2001 and 2010 were for possession, and marijuana represented 46% of all drug arrests in the United States, and disproportionately targeted black and brown people for arrest. Ronald Reagan fear-mongered in 1980 that marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States. Now former Attorney General Jeff Sessions said as recently as 2016 that good people don't smoke marijuana. But these days, the rich white elite are planning to wildly capitalize on the psychoactive plant. And I'm not just talking about former Republican House Speaker John Boehner, who declared himself unalterably opposed to legalization in 2011 only to join the board of a marijuana company in 2018. If cannabis is ever passed in Texas, chances are good that grocery stores will be selling that too, Whole Foods CEO, John Mackey said during a conversation hosted by the Texas Tribune recently.
Well written, Mr. Simon Smith. And to whom it may concern, expunge before you plunge into the deep profits of legalization. Recently, I viewed a film based on a true story titled Kill the Messenger, sharing the brave stand of a journalist named Gary Webb.
To not spoil the movie for others, I will only relay the plot. Journalist Webb uncovers how the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, flooded crack cocaine into black and African American sections of Los Angeles to neutralize the community and help generate funds for the Contras and Nicaraguan freedom fighters, as an endorsement to the purchasing of weapons. After watching the picture, reading the book Dark Alliance by Gary Webb, and researching dozens of affairs surrounding the CIA, example COINTELPRO, and other factions, it is only natural to question what is behind the medication. The blooming of profits of pharmaceutical companies, ridiculous financial gains from the cheap labor of inmates to overpacked prisons and jails, to the double dippers who benefit from marijuana possession arrests and the legalization of cannabis, whether medical or recreational. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. Edmund Burke.
This quote from Burke, addressing the controversy amongst American colonies during the 1760s, during his early times as a member of the British Parliament, is a great way to begin this chapter dedicated to responsibility of self.
How so? Answer. If Burke did not have a clear understanding of self, I highly doubt if he would have ever produced a pamphlet titled Thoughts on the Cause of the Present Discontents. Holding the King George III accountable for his actions against the Constitution, based on the public principle of the desire for a better representation in administration. However, I am not sure if Burke would have followed his particular path or expressed himself in such a manner if he did not have a knowledge of self. And it is this certain knowledge of self that motivates my efforts to conduct a conscientious conversation with intellects such as yourself. Because if you are reading this manuscript, you possibly fit one of the following categories: a person who seeks knowledge from various sources, an individual who supports my work and ideologies, a critic searching for material to discredit. You are simply curious of how subject matter is conveyed, or, God willing, this publication made the suggested list for a reading group or a book club. Regardless of the reason, I am content. Why? Response: knowledge and responsibility of self.
A clear knowledge and responsibility of self is an absolute requirement when making the necessary leaps and bounds toward our purpose in life. One of my purposes as a person and human being is to inform others of pertinent information and encourage individuals to become the greatest version of themselves. However, this concept was not realized overnight. For over 3 decades, I existed in a life tailored to the comfortability and contentment of others, mainly due to the image desired by others, which equated to a boxed-in version of myself. However, thank God, my purpose refused to be ignored or buried alive. In all honesty, this work, along with many other productions and projects, did not have a fighting chance if necessary changes did not take place. One of the greatest changes occurred recently, in 2016, after suffering bilateral injuries resulting in temporary immobility. Moments of this journey were captured in a documentary series entitled Road to Recovery: The Cognitive and Behavioral Approach to Rehabilitation, The Complete Project, and a promotional video of a documentary called Road to Recovery: The Cognitive and Behavioral Approach to Rehabilitation, The Journey. Feel free to check out this project and additional products and services at www.cjwarcreations.com. Harmless self-promotion.
To help support this work and other efforts dedicated to community engagement, youth services, and business development, etc. But I digress. Throughout the process of relearning balance and how to walk, I was forced to sit still and figure out the what and why of the recent realisms of life and existence of life in general. Long story made short, overall, I am greatly appreciative of the ability to take a step, stride, and miraculously sprint again. Therefore, my actions demand more respect and appreciation, and not according to gratitude, but purpose. The purpose to fulfill my destiny and mission, not only for self, but others as well. Why? Answer: your perspective of others and others' perspective of you can be the deciding factor for support or opposition. And Since this world is already pulsating with opposition, I choose support.
In the same manner, we should not only choose support for self, but others also.
Consider this. I have heard through the grapevine over the years, through various unknown sources, it seems you're only about yourself. Replaying these erroneous defamations, I offer no apology for speaking positivity into my life or documenting efforts of walking the talk. Also, rooted in the most humble expression, through the grace and strength of God, I realized success by the age of 17 and officially 18. The following 18 years was specifically dedicated to helping others attain success. And at the end of those 18 years, dedicated to others, I had to reintroduce myself after supporting others more than myself. This is one of the main reasons self-identity is so important and how your perception of self impacts others. In this age of social media and daily spotlights of individuality, self-image is extremely important, and in most cases, it is vital. Do you agree? Better yet, in your own estimation, how do you believe other countries feel about this era of U.S. sociology? Side note, although I may mention democracy as a description, it does not equate to the belief of a certain dictatorship functioning full throttle in plain sight. After that disclaimer, let us proceed. Irrespective to expertise levels concerning international affairs, I am sure that everyone has some sort of grasp regarding free speech in this country and how it is not tolerated in many other countries. Through the revolutionary invention of the internet, the famous expression 6 degrees of separation takes on a whole new meaning. So instead of 6 degrees, it is more like a mouse click away from any person in the world. Based on this societal pragmatism, our perception of others is significant for a variety of reasons. If anyone or any country wants to know what direction this country is going, all it takes is a Twitter account and a reliable search engine. Plus, I will refrain from detailing the dark web because the conversation may turn murky, pun intended. In the same fashion, what does your social media activity and content describe about yourself? Once again, do not forget about the expression, I will tell you the truth. When you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. On the chilly evening of December 3rd, 1969, Fred Hampton, an intelligent young man with a bright future, was assassinated by the FBI as part of the COINTELPRO operation to destroy the faction of the Black Panther Party. The Bureau used a convicted criminal as an accomplice by the name of William O'Neill to infiltrate the political party and get close to Hampton. And on that tragic night, O'Neill spiked Hampton's drink, exited the premises, and signaled police officers to unjustly enter Hampton's residence by force with a barrage of bullets. Then, to inflict further disrespect, once it was discovered Hampton and his wife, with child, were only injured, one of the assassins fatally shot Hampton twice in the back of the head. Huge shout out to Fred Hampton Jr. Continue to stay strong and firm. Some critics may falsely conclude, but it was the Panthers, similar to how many individuals and groups choose to ignore the foundation of why Black Lives Matter came into existence in the first place. Now, let us observe the numerous accounts of others eliminated for walking with a clear indication of self-identity, for self and their perception of others. Abraham Lincoln, April 14th, 1865. Medgar Evers, June 12th, 1963. John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. Sam Cooke, December 11th, 1964. Malcolm X,
February 21st, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. April 4th, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, June 5th, 1968, Alberta Williams King, June 30th, 1974, John Lennon, December 8th, 1980, Huey Newton, August 22nd, 1989. Along with the list of assassinated influential individuals, another name comes to mind, Ruben Salazar. Salazar was, at the time of his death, a writer for the Los Angeles Times and news director of KMEX. Salazar was gunned down by Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies while inside the Silver Dollar Bar and Cafe. Salazar's murder occurred during a Chicano moratorium anti-war protest turned riot. Deputies surrounded the restaurant and fired tear gas missiles into the establishment, and ultimately, Salazar never made it out alive. To receive more information about this national tragedy, the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, released a film titled Ruben Salazar, Man in the Middle, capturing the unfortunate, direct and indirect events of August 29th, 1970. With the greatest level of gratitude and respect, the slain individuals killed in this chapter did not meet their untimely death due to self-identity, but what they represented, social change. Based on this reality, consider the following. Reality, real plus the letter I plus the letter T plus the letter Y. Reality equals real plus I, which is self-identity, plus T plus Y, which is the perception of others. So, in essence, real life experiences develop who you become and how others perceive you. Similar to a soldier following the orders of a general, I have followed similar directives. Learn and apply the fundamental principles of the mission, and through hours of practice and daily discipline, and advance in specialty areas while fine-tuning the areas requiring improvement. Then, once a soldier demonstrates the ability to teach and retain information to others, it is time to promote a soldier to a general. Lastly, if a former soldier turned general is worthy enough, the individual could possibly become colonel. However, this is the procedure of our yesteryears. These days, it is dog eat dog. To provide clarity, I will use an analogy of a personal pastime, athletics, also known as track and field. The Olympic Games is one of the most known, if not most, sporting events in the world. I believe most people have some form of knowledge pertaining to athletics, 4x400 meter relay in particular. However, rather than assume, I will provide a brief description. The 4x400 meter relay is a race. Traditionally, the final event of an athletics competition, or track meet, where a team of 4 runners each sprint a lap around the track, 400 meters, while holding a baton. At the end of each lap, the runners will pass along the baton to another teammate. Lastly, the 4th runner will carry the baton across the finish line. Now, everyone has a premise of the event. Let us proceed. Imagine yourself at an athletics competition, observing the meet officials lining up each team to their respective lanes. And it is time for the 4x400 meter relay, or anchor relay for short. Normally, this event yields 8 teams, 1 team per lane on the track. However, at this event, there are only 6 teams competing. A team member from each team approaches the starting line. The team member positions their blocks, and an official with a starter pistol makes the demand, runners take your mark, get set, followed by a loud bang. You observe the runners making their way around the first curve. Then you notice a few runners experience difficulties along the way, and as a forewarning,
This is not an additional segment to the Naked Gun movie series, but please follow along. Some athletes experience water hoses and spiked whips in the form of concession purchases or any tangible objects light enough to throw at the runners, and barrages of insults and other forms of verbal abuse. All of these actions carrying the same intensity exhibited at any professional sporting event across the country. A few other athletes received several verbal insults and occasionally ricochet of debris, originally intended for other competitors. Then there are some runners who were shot and killed by disqualifications attached to the race. However, around the 300-meter mark, an occurrence begins to take place. A few of the runners begin to experience less toxicity and resentment. Matter of fact, spectators begin to cheer and applaud. This attention and sudden burst of admiration encourages runners to push through the race. But instead of passing along the baton, several competitors decide to keep running to receive more attention and applause. Although a couple of the runners follow suit, other runners followed the race format and pass along the baton to the next in line. Naturally, of course, fatigue sets in for the runners who refuse to hand off the baton. Next, the teams who pass the baton along begin to pass up the attention seekers. Also, the teams who refuse to hand off the baton are now disqualified from the race, but continue to run along with the baton anyway. With baton in hand, the disqualified runners begin to jog, walk, stand, or even take a seat on the track. At this time, the teammates who never received a baton have a choice to make: trade teams, give up and walk off the track, chase down the first leg runners and cause a forced elimination from the race, or the choice many of us have been forced to make: create your own baton so you can run the race you were destined to run. Although these occurrences introduce greedy practices, envy, jealousy, and other dysfunction, by refusing to pass along the baton, it taught many of us creativity and ingenuity. Using this example, think about the current and past generations of the United States. According to Neil Howe and William Strauss, GIs, 1900 to 1924, silent, 1925 to 1945, baby boomers, 1946, 1964, Generation X, 1965 to 1979, millennials, 1980 to 2000, and new silent Generation Z, 2000 to present. Based on the concept of the 4x400 meter relay, how would each generation choose to run the race? I assume the following. GI generation, the most patriotic of the generations. Members of this category understood the importance of living and dying for the sake of family legacy and tradition. 100% chance of passing along the baton. The rationale to this? The foundation of the country, the United States, and backbone of many current systems. Silent generation, the generation following the GI generation, seemed more observant of the sacrifices and direction of the country set by the prior generation. 80% chance of passing along the baton. Rationale: learn and adjust from previous generations, pros and cons. Baby boomers, the generational response to the efforts of the GI and silent generations. Many use the sacrifices of others to fuel the coming age and ages geared around self-gratification and personal achievement. 40% chance of passing along the baton. Rationale: benefited from the foundation built by prior generations and personal contributions to history. Generation X, the generation experiencing change in society's priorities. I would describe as the great unknown. 25% chance of passing along the baton. Rationale: the unknown factor of this generation is greatly influenced by personal attainment, self-gratification, and seasons of increased freedom of speech and self-expression. Millennials and Generation Y, no millennium of intellectual freedom and technological advancement. Or the Y generation, while gaining more information for personal convenience and luxuries, many seek information in hopes of benefiting from those with a lack of information. 10% chance of passing along the baton. Rationale: due to the convenience of society, the masses began to desire quantity over quality, to satisfy the yearning to attain more materials than resources. New Silent and Generation Z. Since history repeats itself, we find the country in a similar predicament. The Silent Generation, a more observant generation who are directed to follow philosophies of prior generations. As many realize, if we are honest with ourselves, something has to give or change in order for us to advance forward. 5% chance of passing along the baton, or 50%. It could go either way. However, I believe in the full potential of the youth. Rationale: recognizing the efforts of prior generations and experiencing the challenges of living free within a society built on profiting from slavery brings a greater sense, need of inclusion.
Following the normal routine, definition before declaration.
Community engagement refers to the process by which community organizations and individuals build ongoing, permanent relationships for the purpose of applying a collective vision for the benefit of a community. Community outreach is an activity of providing services to any populations who might not otherwise have access to those services. Educational services, awareness trainings, etc. A key component of outreach is that the groups providing it are not only stationary but mobile. In other words, they are meeting those in need of outreach services at the locations of those in need. Operating in both capacities, I perceive a deep level of comprehension when it comes to these services. Personally and professionally, I favor community engagement over outreach, and my stance became apparent while working as an academic counselor senior for the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. During a joint staff meeting, the question was raised, how can we better serve students in this particular area of town, known as the Best End? Initially, I refrained from offering an opinion due to the assumptions of words falling on deaf ears. But since I perform most of my work in this specific community, I had to advocate. No offense, but I must say this. Based on my observations from working in this particular community, simple outreach won't cut it. Sure, you can take a student away from their environment for an entire day and immerse he or she with the fruits of society, but at the end of the day, the student has to return home. In psychology, there's a statistic that says it takes 7 positive statements to reverse 1 negative statement. So, to truly better serve the student, you must service the whole family. My response may not have been met with favor, but I had to use my current seat to voice the concerns of those who rarely get a seat at the table. This is why I aim to meet people where they are, mentally, physically, and spiritually, in hopes of not implying I am better or need to fix someone, but instead using my time and commitment to support the general public and the residents of the community, not only for a day, but as long as the community desires my services. Busing services and the need to receive better resources was evident by the U.S. Supreme Court decision to utilize busing for racial integration in schools. A great instance to convey the big picture, as mentioned prior, Brown versus Board of Education and integrated schools, but it did not mean accessibility. From 1954 to 1971, community and neighborhood schools did not receive or witness the effects of integration. All events considered, this enforcement meant combining individuals into oftentimes antagonistic circumstances. Read more at the New York Times, by court order, busing ends where it began, 1999. In the same fashion as the student example prior, students, majority sports-related and STEM programs, were bused to communities to receive more exposure. However, ultimately, the new communities benefited from the students' talents and gifts, rather than the community the student resided originally. Occasionally, there are exceptions to the rule. Celebrities, career professionals, professional athletes, etc., when certain individuals are accepted back into their childhood community and have the opportunity to give back. To these individuals, keep up the good work.
However, in some cases, students who have been plucked up from their community and planted into a foreign environment attempt to bring back the knowledge and experience attained while absent and are denied re-entry. For an example of this occurrence, a dinner scene from the 1972 movie titled Trick Baby, an Iceberg Slim novel turned into a screenplay.
It's you liberals who have lifted them up, Howard.
Oh, you conservatives make a mistake. You can't afford to strangle hope in people. Without hope, people become dangerous.
No, Howard. You liberals have let them invade our society. You give them jobs, political jobs.
Oh, you missed the point. It's only the smart ones we move up.
That makes it even worse.
Oh, we have to move them up. If we leave a smart one in the ghetto, he might develop into a leader against us. But if we raise him up into white society, we neutralize him. He feels compelled to try to act like us. He loses his identity and his racial anger, if he has any. He becomes alien to his brothers. They realize he sold them out and they grow to hate him. He becomes worthless to them and safe for us. No, thank you. In fact, in his love for the creature comforts, except for his color, he's become one of us.
Once again, the term self-schemas comes to mind. During my travels stateside and abroad, one recognizable commonality expressed are the variations of social, cultural, and ethnic pride. And psychologically, what happens to the individual or individuals who do not experience this occurrence? For the sake of community pride across this nation, I believe this deserves a conscientious conversation. Food deserts can be described as geographical areas where residents access to affordable, healthy food options, especially fresh fruits and vegetables, is restricted or non-existent due to the absence of grocery stores within convenient traveling distance. For instance, according to a report prepared for Congress by the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, about 2.3 million people, or 2.2% of all U.S. households, live more than 1 mile away from a supermarket and do not own a car. In urban areas, access to public transportation may help residents overcome the difficulties posed by distance, but economic forces have driven grocery stores out of many cities in recent years, making them so few and far between that an individual's food shopping trip may require taking several buses or trains. In suburban and rural areas, public transportation is either very limited or unavailable, with supermarkets often many miles away from people's homes. The other defining characteristics of food deserts is socioeconomic, that is, they are most commonly found in communities of color and low-income areas, where many people don't have cars. Studies have found that wealthy districts have 3 times as many supermarkets as the poor ones do. That white neighborhoods contain an average of 4 times as many supermarkets as predominantly black ones do. And the grocery stores in the African American communities are usually smaller with less selection. People's choices about what to eat are severely limited by the options available to them and what they can afford. And many food deserts contain an overabundance of fast food chains selling cheap meat and dairy-based foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. Processed foods, such as snack cakes, chips, and soda, typically sold by corner delis, convenience stores, and liquor stores, are usually just as unhealthy. Food Empowerment Project 2019. The truth and effects of food deserts became obvious while working in lower socioeconomic areas in Louisville, Kentucky. During lunch breaks, or the rare occasion I forgot to bring my lunch to work, I would have to drive nearly 20 to 30 minutes for healthy food choices. The travel time put a strain on my lunch break due to traffic, random public disturbances, or receiving the wrong order. But it caused me to ponder, if individuals have limited transportation options, the decision to walk is too dangerous. Pedestrians struck by vehicles, crime, etc. And no nearby fresh food markets. No wonder the large number of residents experience health issues and concerns. If greasy, fried foods, candy, and drinks loaded with high levels of sugar and alcohol and tobacco products are available on nearly every corner of the intersection, it is inevitable. Based on this realization, I would like to offer a special shout out to the First Lady, Michelle Obama, for making an assertive effort to bring more grocery stores and fresh produce to various cities and communities experiencing food deserts. Read the First Lady's commentary at the 2011 Mayor Summit on Food Deserts as a part of her Let's Move campaign.
Studies have shown that people who live in communities with greater access to supermarkets, they eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, surprise. And that can have a real impact on the health of our families. I mean, truly, we all grew up in communities with grandmothers who cooked 2-3 vegetables that you had to eat. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But that's because many of our grandparents, they had community gardens. There was the vegetable man that came around. There were many other resources that allowed them to have access. So it's not that people don't know or don't want to do the right thing, they just have to have access to the foods that they know will make their families healthier. We also know that no one-size-fits-all solution is going to work. Every community and every city and every town are different, but they all have one thing in common. They all have leaders like all of you who have joined us today who have the power to make a real difference. And really, that's all that's needed, sometimes, is a little power and a little will.
In the same spirit of Mrs. Obama, we must all do our part, whether we choose to play a large role or a small part. Let's move and make an impact together.
Equity, which is a noun, the quality of being fair or impartial, fairness, impartiality, something that is fair and just.
Recently, I paid a long overdue visit to my relatives in Southern California. During my stay, they offered an opportunity to sightsee many areas surrounding Los Angeles, California.
Apart from the beautiful views of the coastline, the great vibes of Venice Beach, and the freshness of mountain air mixed with ocean breeze, I could not ignore my observation of the homeless population. Oddly enough, this article was released during my trip. Check out the article from Cowan, 2019.
The grim stats from around California have piled up in recent weeks. In Alameda County, the number of homeless residents jumped 43% over the past 2 years. In Orange County, that number was 42%. Kern County volunteers surveying the region's homeless population found a 50% increase over 2018. San Francisco notched a 17% increase since 2017. And on Tuesday, Los Angeles officials released the results of their most recent count. Homelessness was up by 12% over last year in the county and up 16% in the city of Los Angeles. That puts LA County's homeless population at 58,936 and the city's at 36,300. And yet, communities around the state have been funneling more money into services for the homeless, like LA's Measure H sales tax, which is adding about $355 million each year to the arsenal.
To my relatives, partners, and supporters in Riverside, California area, thank you for the California love and genuine hospitality. Salute.
Then, on my return flight to Kentucky, I began to reflect on growing up in a middle-class family and how the existing middle class is drawing closer to extinction. This is due to a variety of reasons, including, but not limited to, greed, the decrease of empathy across the nation, and the age of individualization. The U.S. class system is transitioning from the standard model of lower, middle, or median, and upper class to the haves and have-nots. And the slow dissolve of the middle class creates an imbalance. Data from the Census Bureau also shines a light on the reduction of income as it relates to the average of weekly wages. Now, I must ask the question, how on earth can any household in the United States of America work more hours per week and take home less income? In rhetorical fashion, I must simply state national employment rates. So again, I ask the question, what are the contributing factors? Now, let us bring this together. The original purpose of labor unions was to protect individuals from employer abuse, wages, working conditions, etc. To cover all bases, someone may inquire, what does union membership fees have to do with the decline of the middle class? Response, empathy. Or, in this case, the nation's sense of advocacy for itself. For example, I will use an analogy. Let's say there are 3 independent companies, Company A, Company B, and Company C. Consider 4 categories: type of leadership, number of employees, unionized or non-unionized, and healthcare coverage. For Company A, type of leadership, joint community, majority rules, number of employees, 100 to 200. Unionized or non-unionized, yes. Healthcare coverage, network coverage, company funded. Now we go to Company B. Type of leadership, board of directors. Number of employees, 200,000 plus. Unionized or non-unionized, yes, but partially. Healthcare coverage, shared coverage. Example, company pays 50%, employee pays 50%. Now we go on to Company C. Type of leadership, chief executive officer. Number of employees, 500,000 plus. Unionized or non-unionized, no. Healthcare coverage, employee paid coverage. Shared coverage in some cases. Based on the overview, which company do you believe is more sustainable, protected, and driven by employee approval and mandates to improve the quality of life for company employees or workers? Personally, I would say Company A. Company A is led by a joint community, a democracy, has a small number of employees, greater stock options, is unionized, employees are protected, and healthcare coverage is protected through network benefits, doctors and physicians within the company's network. Company B is led by a board of directors, elected or non-elected, invested or not invested, has a large number of employees, stock options are optional, employee paid, and only percentages, is partially unionized, protection is based on membership contingencies, and in most cases, the amount of employee contributions. And employee health care coverage is under suggested network physicians or out-of-network plans, company contingency based on employees' health history, and employee copay options. Company C is led by one chief executive officer, dictatorship or authoritarianism, has the largest number of employees, limited to no stock options available, majority out-of-work network opportunities, is non-unionized, employees are not protected from the community mandates unless represented by self or outside, employee paid legal services. And employee coverage is solely based on employee contributions. Majority of employees literally cannot afford to be sick. Considering this example, I believe the importance of advocacy is apparent. Ironically, systematically, Company A B, and C mirrors the current economic classism in America. The number of employees and the number of citizens may vary, but the concept is structurally parallel. While speaking on the subject of advocacy, the topic of missing persons in the U.S. urgently needs a conscientious conversation and plan of action. The overall number of missing persons in America, at least in 2018, based on FBI reports, totaled 612,846. Feel free to view the following data charts from the Black and Missing Foundation in Landover Hills, Maryland. Side note, BAMFI. I appreciate your purpose and efforts towards addressing the topic at hand. Based on general perception through media, television, film, radio, and broadcasting services, and other outlets, social media, podcasts, and other online streams, an unbiased mind could assume most missing persons are women, especially when considering the ongoing crisis of human and sex trafficking. But bookmark this epidemic for right now, and I will revisit shortly. In addition, the average U.S. citizen, unless affected primarily or secondary, does not know what the acronym AMBER, in reference to Amber Alert, represents. Many individuals assume the alert stands for Amber Hagerman and the tragic story of her kidnapping and murder. Although the alert was derived from her name, it officially stands for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. Be assured, the mentioning of these tragic happenings are for the purpose of comparison and not to belittle tragic events. With that said, missing cases like that of Amber Hagerman, or JonBenet Ramsey, Elizabeth Smart, or Kaylee Anthony, or Madeleine McCain are, by far, the most famous missing person cases in U.S. history, mainstream. But, at the same time, cases such as Erica Heather Smith, Bianca Lily Jones, Diamond Yvette Bradley, Jossier Stockley, and Myra Lewis have never seemed to gain nationwide exposure. And I believe this singularity is an effect known as the missing white girl syndrome, based on a highly cited essay written by Sarah Stillman. So, what about missing minorities, specifically Black and African American women? When I think about the nearly 75,000 Black girls and women missing across the nation, it is impossible not to mention Relisha Rudd, Shania Boyd, Sheree Payne, and many other young women in the Washington, D.C. area who still remain missing without the national exposure. Matter of fact, a broader sense of statistics could keep the uninformed at bay if private research is not conducted. Sure, in 2017, there was a 95% success rate for resolved missing cases involving girls and women, but the 5% carryover were all African American or Black or Latino. This statistic represented the DC area and not the nation's 7% makeup of Black girls and women or their 35% representation of the national missing cases across the U.S. Read more at Sean King, Our Missing Women and Girls. A few of the nation's missing cases, which have not received major coverage, is that of Victoria Shaw, Tina Day Slater, and Amber Evans.
All names listed are important and deserve individual attention. But for right now, I want to focus on Amber Evans. Why?
Answer. Evans went missing right after she accepted her role as Executive Director of Juvenile Justice Coalition in Ohio. Not sure about you, but considering her promotion from staff member to director was based on her efforts regarding public advocacy, I would like to think the public would advocate for her. Where is her alert? In addition to the Amber Alert, on the basis of knowledge and public information, there are a few additional alerts: Blue Alert, Silver Alert, and the Endangered Missing Persons Alert, etc. Blue Alert is an alert issued when law enforcement officers have been killed or seriously injured by a citizen or non-citizen of the U.S. Silver alert is an alert issued when individuals suffering from mental health conditions such as Alzheimer's disease and various forms of dementia. In addition, older adults with a history of mental illness. Endangered missing persons alert is an alert issued when individuals of any age go missing dealing with any intellectual disabilities. Before continuing, I would like to make another public service announcement. I applaud the efforts of public safety and the responders who service the general public at large. However, I believe we, as a society, can do a better job of servicing our own country as a whole rather than designated areas of economic interest. So now, after covering a few public service alerts for missing persons, it is time to digress to the crisis of human and sex trafficking. More specifically, the concept of human trafficking as it relates to organ trafficking. Concerning the great need for transplants in the U.S., when will we begin a conscientious conversation of what alert to issue when the cadavers of minorities, specifically African American or Black males, are discovered with missing organs? Jason Smith, 14 years of age, found dead in a lake on June 6, 2011, with all of his vital organs missing from his body. Vance Anderson, age 51, died in 2012 and was sent to a funeral home with his eyes, brain, heart, and pancreas missing from his body. Kendrick Johnson, age 17, found dead wrapped in a wrestling mat on January 11, 2013, with all of his organs missing from his body. Ryan Singleton, age 24, found dead 2 months after his car broke down on July 9, 2013, with his eyes, heart, lungs, and liver missing from his body. Everett Palmer Jr., age 41, died in 2018 while in police custody and returned to his family with his throat, brain, and heart missing from his body.
Along with the mentioned departed, there are numerous cases of individuals with similar stories and concerns. With all topics and areas considered,
and the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me.
To my friends and family members who happen to be classified or identified as white, much love and respect for not following the narrative of this country's harsh past or present. Individuals such as yourselves have helped create positive moments this nation needs to experience to a greater degree. Growing up, about 80 to 90% of my close childhood friends just happen to be white. And those individuals, I conclude, peace and love. And to the individuals I met along the way, I thank you for being decent human beings. There is a well-known expression stated, actions speak louder than words. Using this statement, I present the following question. What do our individual actions say about us? Why is this inquiry important? Answer. For we, the people, can arrange a conscientious conversation amongst ourselves, we must discuss yesterday for the sake of today and the future of tomorrow. So I will leave you with this. We must go behind enemy lines to discuss the issues of the times. The price of tattered flesh funded entire states, while slavery was replaced by the systems to incarcerate, to educate the youth graduated into bargaining chips, while the media programmed the masses to succumb to deception rather than someone through affection. Our society has overdosed on misdiagnosed medication. So let us sober up so we can see ourselves more clearly in hopes for my neighbor to be my friend and not my enemy. dope because I'm black. I'm dope because I'm black. I'm dope because I'm black. Black lives matter, everybody know that.